Chapter 687. The monster that attacked the mechanical chocobo riders was a skura. When the Emperor created the blazing shade beast, he accidentally created a variant of the blazing shade beast. Its upper body had 6 jackal-like heads, and its lower body was completely made up of tentacles. After the hatchery created hundreds of blazing shade beasts, in order to not waste anything, the Emperor gathered the defective products that could not survive the transformation of the blazing shade beasts and molded them into a skura. Similarly, this monster was handed over to the hound tamer to command. If it was on land, skura would not stand a chance against more than 200 mechanical chocobo riders. Before it could even use its tentacles to entangle the enemy, it would be riddled with bullets. But when it came to underwater sneak attacks, skura was definitely an expert. Not only could it use the tentacles on its body, but it could also use spell-like abilities similar to Evar's black tentacles to create thousands of tentacles to end the enemy. Unless the enemy had the ability to breathe underwater like it did. But obviously, when designing the mechanical chocobo riders, the gnomes did not take underwater combat into consideration. The gnome riders all drowned to death. Damn it, what is that thing? Darapater sat on the ice sleigh, urging the warrior driving it to speed up as he was shocked. He did not expect the enemy to have an underwater monster, and the death of the mechanical chocobo riders made the gnome's heart ache even more. After all, they were his own kind, and Darapater could name many of them. We have to inform the steam tanks. If they encounter the monster on the ice, they will be dragged into the sea. The gnome rogue in the investigation team immediately picked up the communicator, signaled to the captain, and began to contact the icebreaker. However, before the icebreaker could respond, they saw the 3 steam tanks galloping on the ice. Immediately afterward, the same scene happened again. Skylar ambushed the 3 steam tanks under the ice. And this ambush was even more efficient than the one on the mechanical chocobo riders. The monster did not even use its tentacles to drag them. It merely cut through the ice, and the 3 tanks sank to the bottom of the sea due to their own weight. Full speed ahead, return to the icebreaker. Darapater could not help but shout. But at this time, their ice sleigh was firmly held in place by a long whip. The hound tamer caught up. The General of Calamity was now in human form. He stood barefoot on the cold ice, leaving deep footprints under his scorching feet. The Emperor said. The General of Calamity's eyes flashed with fire. You scum must die here. A strong current of electricity suddenly surged out, and the gnome investigators on the ice sleigh was immediately electrocuted. Darapater rolled off the ice sleigh. But the warriors were not so lucky. All of them were electrocuted to the point that they lost their senses. Their bodies were penetrated by the electric current and emitted a charred smell. Honey, pawnbroker, sugarmouth, old fudge. Darapater muttered his friends' names in pain. But given the current situation, he had no time to grieve. He could only run away with the help of the gnome rogue and the monk. Looking at the approaching enemy, Darapater suddenly stopped. He shook off his 2 companions who were supporting him and said, "Leave me here. You 2 quickly go back and report the situation. Tell the master craftsman that the Emperor is likely to be plotting something, and we must act decisively. Go." After that, the gnome illusionist rushed to the hound tamer who was chasing after him. With a bloody dwarf head in his hand, the hound tamer walked to the front of the Emperor. Shurgu stood aside and looked at him with jealousy and envy in his eyes. A hardy hunt, this should have been my honor. However, the hound tamer could not hear his inner complaints, and the Emperor would not care about the thoughts of a mere subordinate. The ancient slave owner took Darapater's head from the General of Calamity. Black flames spewed out from his palm. Those flames erased the gnome illusionist's facial features, skin, and flesh. In the end, only a pale skull was left in the Emperor's palm. He held this toy and handed it back to the hound tamer. This is the mystical item that I've bestowed upon you. It's called the humiliation of the gnomes. Obviously, the emperor had also come up with this name on the spur of the moment. However, this name was very consistent with the function of this mystical item. It can cast an illusion spell 3 times a day. If the target of the spell is a gnome, then using it to cast a spell has a very high probability of causing that gnome to suffer from bleaching. The so-called gnome bleach was actually a genetic disease unique to the gnomes. This disease would continue to cause a sick gnome to lose pigment and eventually even endanger his life. Few gnomes could survive this disease. Even if they survived, they would become a gnome without a sense of humor. For creatures like them, it was worse than death. "Thank you, my lord." The hound tamer excitedly accepted the reward. Although this strange object was made by the emperor on a whim, for the hound tamer, it was tantamount to a magic weapon that could make up for his casting shortcomings. Being able to use 3 more spells a day would undoubtedly increase his strength by a lot. The emperor was quite satisfied with the hound tamer's performance this time. This general of calamity, who was often known for his bravery but not his wisdom, made good use of the monster Skylar in this hunting operation. Almost without bloodshed, he almost wiped out a large number of cavalry on Gnome Island, 3 steam tanks, and the investigation team leader that the Gnome Island wanted to protect. The hound tamer seems to have grown some brains, the emperor thought to himself. If he can gain some wisdom every time he dies, then I can let him die a few more times. In fact, the emperor was right. The change in the general of calamity was indeed related to his resurrection after his death. But if he was killed and resurrected again in the future, then the increase in wisdom would not be too much. After all, Leviathan creatures also had their own upper limit of intelligence. Yes, the current hound tamer was actually a Leviathan creature. The blazing shadow beast that the emperor killed casually and used to graft the general of calamity's head was originally transformed from Weather, the head of the thieves in Soft Maple City. Keys had already implanted Leviathan's body tissue in his body. After connecting the dog tamer's head, the Leviathan organization immediately occupied the other party's head. Chapter 688. The Pygmies lost half of their crew, allowing Keys to successfully wedge a nail into the Emperor's heart. It had to be said that this deal was really worth it, of course, only for the latter. At the same time, for the third party of this deal, this was not news worth celebrating. The Pygmies' icebreaker left? The fat mayor of Soft Maple City wailed and slumped in his seat, like a deflated balloon. 3 hourglasses ago, he was still full of confidence that he had the storm mech and was prepared to use it to seize the throne of the alliance leader of the 5 cities. 2 hourglasses ago, when he discovered that the switch of the war machine was locked, he felt uneasy. And now, he knew that the dwarves had taken the initiative to retreat. The only thing that existed in his heart was fear and helplessness. Like the people who drowned before, he wanted to do his best to grasp even a straw. "Go and invite the mayor of Red Pine City," the fat mayor said to his attendant. "Tell him that I decided to support their previous election results. Let them quickly take the army and station in Soft Maple City. Empty the houses in the communities around the city wall and prepare barracks for the army." Now that he had lost his confidence, there were not many obstacles in the negotiation. Mayor Red Pine left Soft Maple City with a stack of promises and quickly rushed to Juniper Village to share the news with the other leaders of the 5 cities' alliance army. When the sun set in the west, a mighty army came out of the dense forest, flags fluttering and momentum high. The gate of Soft Maple City had been sealed, so the army could only enter through a small gate at the corner of the city wall. It took a lot of effort to reorganize the ranks, and they were all stationed in this precarious city. The fat mayor fulfilled his promise, and the houses in several blocks near the city wall were vacated, and the citizens who originally lived there were driven out. However, they were not homeless. The rich merchants who fled before left a lot of big houses, enough for these people to live in. At least there were as many beds and roofs as they wanted. In his own mayor's residence, the mayor of Soft Maple City had a meeting with the mayors of the other 4 cities. In order to boost his confidence, he even specially asked someone to invite Quest down from the Leviathan battleship. Everyone, this is our ally, the plenipotentiary of the scale of perpetual order, Mr. Keyes. The fat mayor arranged a seat for the young blue dragon, sitting next to him. Previously, because the paladins needed to be stationed in Soft Maple City, the guards of Herone's prayer priest were provided by Mr. Keyes. They are reliable support against the Emperor. After seeing the Goliath's men, Mayor Green, who was a warrior by nature, was obviously very interested in the scale of perpetual order. He was very curious about the chamber organization that could have such elite warriors. Let's be open and speak. We want to know the exact strength of the Emperor now, and the specific garrison forces in Soft Maple City. Green nodded to Keyes as a kind of greeting, then turned to look at the fat mayor. The armies of the 4 cities have basically become familiar with each other after a few days of joint marching, so we hope that Soft Maple's army can also join in. The so-called Soft Maple's army did not only refer to the Steel Fork camp. The mayors of the other cities also generally understood the family of their old neighbors. They were very clear in their hearts what the garrison of Soft Maple City looked like. Therefore, they were not too interested in the army that could only suppress the civilians, seize the wealth of some smugglers, and at most fight a favorable battle. What Green and the others were really interested in was the mercenary army of the mayor of Soft Maple City. As for the troops of the Herone's paladins, just like the other reinforcements sent by the temple, these troops listened to the orders of the temple's priests on duty, and it was not up to them to command and deploy. The Steel Fork camp of Soft Maple City has a history of 600 years, a full strength of 1,000 people, and now, there are actually about 500 people. The fat mayor was actually speechless about his own incompetent garrison. If it wasn't for the fact that he was worried that the officers would mutiny, he could have dealt with all of them by the law just based on the fact that they were not paid. I've hired a private army with a total of 253 people. Every one of them is an elite who has been through hundreds of battles. Those good lads, each of them can take on at least 10 people. When gambling, unless the last bet was made, one must not show one's cards. But now the mayor of Soft Maple City knew that he had no bargaining chips, so he could only choose a strategy bluff. Mayor Green looked at the other mayors. The mayor of Red Pine City did not have any expression, while the mayors of Black Willow and Blue Maple slightly shook their heads. The combined forces of these 4 cities amounted to about 20,000 men, while the garrison of Soft Maple City was only able to provide a tenth of the total number of men. This group of old foxes would not believe in the nonsense of 1 against 10. Then, in addition to these troops, what war resources can Soft Maple City provide? Green thought for a moment and did not delve into the issue of the army. He did have a better view of the overall situation, so he was very clear that now was not the time to ridicule the mayor's administrative ability or the other party's character. We will certainly consume a lot of resources to fight against the Emperor. Although Emeraldwood City has brought a certain amount of supplies, but if we fight a hard battle, those things are just a drop in the bucket. It was another question that the fat mayor almost could not answer. Soft Maple City still had no confidence in this regard. There were some weapons and equipment in the city's garrison warehouse, but those were old stocks that had been there for hundreds of years. Moreover, whether they could be used or not was another matter. Who knew if the previous officers of the Steel Fork camp sold them privately? As for other supplies, at present Soft Maple City's food was in short supply. Perhaps there were still some stored food in the homes of the citizens, but the city's large granary was indeed empty. Not to mention the war beasts brought by the 4-city alliance. Just feeding more than 20,000 soldiers was estimated to last a day or two, and it was as generous as possible. Just as the mayor of Soft Maple City was racking his brains to find some words, Keyes, who was sitting next to him, suddenly interrupted his words. Soft Maple City has an ancient war machine, As long as there is enough dye, it can always fight on the battlefield. This sentence attracted the attention of all the mayors, and what he said next made them all perk up their ears. That mech should be the ancient Ramsey and the gnome's preparation for the possibility of the emperor being awakened. As far as I know, after the ancient war, there are still many mechs that are missing, so I suspect that every city that has the seal of the Calamity General is like Soft Maple City, and such a war machine is buried in case of a rainy day. Everyone here might as well think, is there a suspicious mech buried in your city? Now that the emperor has been awakened, what we need to fight against him is the confidence of the Ramsey people. Chapter 689. When others constantly probed into your shortcomings, the best way to deal with it was not to evade, but to throw a question that was more interesting to the other party that you didn't understand. For example, what Keyes just said. All the mayors present already knew that Soft Maple City had a storm mech. To be honest, if it weren't for the existence of this war machine, they wouldn't have to talk to the mayor of Soft Maple City. It would be a waste of time. Instead of that, they might as well take over the defense of the city by force. At most, they would just elect a puppet mayor. It was because the other party held the trump card that the leaders of the four-city alliance chose to discuss, instead of directly making arrangements. However, Keyes's words seemed to give them a wake-up call. I see, they all secretly pondered. The war machine may not only be in Soft Maple City, we just haven't found where it is buried. When all the thoughts were taken away by Keyes, the young blue dragon threw out another question almost without thinking. Finding where the mech is buried is one thing, how to operate it is another. That kind of war machine is not a simple toy. It requires a very professional pilot and a special fuel to be able to move it. What fuel is needed? How can it be driven? How can the mech be driven? These mayors immediately gave feedback in their mind. But as experienced as they were, they all didn't ask directly. But that was enough. In just a few words, Keyes had already grasped their lifeline. As for how to operate the mech, the theory behind the operation of the mech, and the problem of fuel, as he spoke, he pointed to the mayor of Soft Maple City. This pilot once operated the war machine and fought General Jia. He has the most right to speak. When everyone's eyes were on him, the fat mayor was extremely nervous. They still don't know that the mech is malfunctioning, he kept warning himself in his mind, but he put on a rather conceited expression and said in a relaxed tone, Mr. Keyes is right, I do have experience in this area. I used to be an alchemist in Soft Maple City, I know what kind of fuel that machine needs. You have to believe me, that thing is definitely not easy to configure. It fought a battle before and cut a fiery tribulation general into 17 or 18 pieces. The fuel tank of the storm mecha is still not full. Hearing his words, the other mayors looked at each other. Green took the lead and asked, The mecha you're talking about should be the big guy in the courtyard, right? Shouldn't it be a creation of Dwarf Island? If we find the buried mechs, can we exchange them for that kind of fuel from the dwarves at the currency settlement center in every city? At present, we don't know. The fat mayor shrugged his shoulders. That mech was not made by the dwarves, but a powerful weapon that the ancient Ramsey people used buried underground resources to buy from arms dealers in other worlds through the dwarves. The gnomes did not know much about this type of mech. I tried to place an order at the currency settlement center, but the person in charge there hasn't replied to me yet. What he said was the truth. After the battle with the Hound Tamer, the fat mayor saw that the fuel tank was almost empty. The first thing he did was to go to the currency settlement center opened by the dwarves in the city, wanting to buy some ready-made light oil and heavy oil from there. However, the other party's trading staff said that they did not have those kinds of resources on hand, and that the Dwarf Island's catalog did not have those two kinds of goods. Therefore, he had to mobilize the alchemists in Soft Maple City to use the remaining stock of black oil to hurry up and refine more light oil and heavy oil. However, there was not much black oil left, and they estimated that at most, they could only refine half of the alchemy products required. For this reason, the fat mayor was annoyed for a long time and wanted to take advantage of the 5 cities alliance's opportunity to get some black oil from other cities. The mayors didn't comment on his answer. However, they did not think that the fat mayor was lying, because such a lie was too easy to see through. As long as they went to the currency settlement center in person and asked, they would be able to find out. However, it seemed that they did not have that much time. Mayor, the mercenary leader, broke into the meeting room. This tough man who could gouge out the arrowheads on his body with a knife had a pale face. "I'm afraid you can't continue the discussion here. There are many monsters gathered outside the city, a lot of them," he finally emphasized. When Keys and the leaders of the 5 cities alliance walked up the city wall, the first thing they saw was an endless group of monsters. It seems a little strange, Keys thought for a moment, then shouted in the direction of the city wall tower, "Use the trebuchet and throw a stone 35 degrees to the west, about 800 yards. Hit the mark, don't miss it too much." Because the enemy had a large formation, at this time, not only were the Steel Fork camp on the city wall, but the paladins and mercenaries also came to help. Under the command of an old mercenary, the projectile fired by the trebuchet accurately hit the designated position. Even from a distance, Keys could hear a crisp pop sound. It was the sound of flesh and bones being smashed by the stone cannon. Then, everyone on the city wall saw that the monster army that was besieging the city suddenly lost a corner, like a moon cake that was bitten off. It turned out that the monsters were not real. Many of them were illusions. "It's just a bluff." The mayor of Black Willow City saw this, and said to several of his companions casually. They all agreed. They can create illusions. Unlike the other mayors, the fat mayor of Soft Maple City was not as optimistic as the other mayors. He took a deep breath and said, "There is at least one more type of monster. Those new monsters, what kind of creatures are they?" Soon, he knew the answer. Among the monsters, a short and ugly guy walked out. This ugly and hunchbacked creature had 3 glowing blue eyes, and greasy hair covered its head and back like a cloak. However, if one looked carefully, one could still see the shape of its face and ears before it was transformed. They are the dead gnomes. The fat mayor was secretly shocked. At the same time, he also understood why this monster had the ability to create illusions. It was the gnome's talent, but now it was used on the wrong path of destruction. Chapter 690. The Emperor twisted the bodies of the dead gnomes and transformed them into little monsters, some kind of ugly little monster with 2 evil characteristics of cruel troublemakers and sadistic destroyers. The little monsters had a naughty nature, a wicked sense of humor, and a habit of wantonly destroying anything beautiful. A small number of little monsters inherited the gnome race's talent and had the ability to control illusions. Creating a terrible illusion was as easy as eating and drinking. The rest of the less talented ones were stuffed into the bodies of mechanical chocobos and steam tanks by the Emperor. They were made into terrible half-biological, half-mechanical killers to complete the mission of destroying Soft Maple City. Since he was born in Demon's Grave, the Emperor was no stranger to this kind of mechanical transformation. He even optimized the performance of those mechanical creations to make them more powerful tools to attack Soft Maple City. The flesh and brains of the little monsters gave these tools the ability to think that they did not have before. This newly formed army was still handed over to the dog trainer to command by the Emperor. For a leader, it was the most reassuring to hand over a powerful armed force to a mindless subordinate. After getting this group of little monsters, the dog trainer immediately expressed his desire to avenge the humiliation. He volunteered to lead the new monster army to besiege Soft Maple City, vowing to destroy the city and rescue the captive Soul Search and foolish Jian. Yes, the news of the unlucky one-eyed eagle monster being captured had been investigated by the Emperor. As the creator of the Calamity General, no matter how far away, The Emperor could feel the vitality in the bodies of these subordinates. Just last night, foolish Jian was on the verge of collapse due to Nera's devastation. Although he was very disdainful of this captive subordinate, now was the time to use people. He did need foolish Jian's outstanding ability to sow discord. So he ordered the dog trainer to bring foolish Jian back. It did not matter if he did not leave the corpse intact in the end. Anyway, the Emperor had a way to resurrect Calamity General. So, shortly after the army of Tsuemu, Hongsong, Lanfeng, and Hailiu entered Soft Maple City, the dog trainer led the army to surround the city. Calamity General directly ordered a few little monsters that could use illusions to disturb the enemy's morale. In this way, there was the scene of the endless monster army just now. In fact, the real number of the monster army was only 1/5 of what the illusion showed. Of course, this scale was enough to make Soft Maple City suffer. We've brought spare parts for the city's defense weapons. Grim glanced at the mayor and said proudly, "There are 20 scorpion cannons and more than 10 large carts of artillery shells that can be used. Do you think? Quickly let the soldiers come up to the city wall to set up weapons." The fat mayor grabbed the hand of the leader of the 5-city alliance and said warmly, "In the past 2 days, the Emperor's army has repeatedly attacked and harassed us. A lot of weapons and ammunition in Soft Maple City have been consumed. This is all thanks to you." "What I mean is," Grim said as he pulled out his hand, "the monsters want to attack the city. Let our troops take over the defense of Soft Maple City for the time being. You can allocate the mercenaries and the Steel Fork Battalion to us." No problem, no problem. You can use the lazy men of the Steel Fork Battalion as you wish. Even if you whip them, I have no objection." Seeing this situation, Grim no longer beat around the bush. "I'm talking about your mercenaries, the real elite. The Steel Fork Battalion can only be used as laborers to carry things. I want the group of real warriors." The fat mayor still wanted to say a few more words. In fact, he didn't want his mercenaries to listen to Grim's command because they were the last force he used to protect himself. Without the group of mercenaries, his position in the city would have been precarious. "They're going to attack the city." Ignoring the 2 mayors, Keyes' eyes were fixed on the enemy in the distance. Through the cover of the illusion, he saw the dog trainer standing at the back of the team. However, because it was still uncertain whether the Emperor had any way to monitor the battle, for the time being, Keyes couldn't use his psychic ability to directly contact the nail he buried. He could only wait for the right time. The dog tamer, or rather, he who wore the skin of a dog tamer but was actually a leviathan, had the same idea as Kith. Even when he saw the ruler standing on the city wall, he was still expressionless. Enchanted steam tanks bombard the city wall. Along with the sound of a whip, the hound tamer ordered the demonized steam tank that had fused with the little monsters. As soon as the order was given, 3 tanks with 3 turrets drove out from the group of monsters. Between the gaps of the steel plates, there were many cylindrical protrusions in the shape of mushrooms. Those were the most sensitive sensors on their bodies. The 3 tanks, a total of 9 turrets, simultaneously completed their ballistic trajectory correction. While they were still bickering on the city wall, 9 simultaneous popping sounds suddenly rang out. Following a rumbling sound, 9 cannonballs accurately hit the city gate of Soft Maple City. The city gate was reinforced with iron hoops, and there were many stones piled up behind the gate. But in the face of the concentrated fire of the steam tanks, it was like a piece of paper. It didn't play any defensive role at all and was blown to pieces in an instant. The hoops on the wooden planks fell apart, and the stones behind the gate were all shaken to pieces. The city gate of Soft Maple City collapsed in an instant. If Keyes hadn't seen the steam tanks hidden in the illusion, the newly established 5-city alliance would have been declared disbanded. None of the mayors could escape, and all of them would be buried in the ruins after the city gate collapsed. Abandon this section of the wall. Let the defenders withdraw to the surrounding blocks and set up positions. Set up all the scorpion cannons on the roof. Grim immediately ordered the 2 black armored knights beside him after recovering from the shock. Now, the city gate of Soft Maple City had been blasted open, and a large piece of the city wall was missing. It was not enough to support a defensive line, so he decided to destroy a few blocks near the city wall, and use it as a temporary barbican for defense. The target of Grim's mobilization was only the coalition forces of the 4 cities. He had no time to arrange and mobilize the defense forces of Soft Maple City. Since the fat mayor was unwilling to let the mercenaries listen to a unified command, he might as well let them fend for themselves. Anyway, this city is not Emeraldwood City, Green secretly thought. Even if it is smashed to pieces, I won't feel distressed at all. However, Green didn't notice that in the collapsed ruins, there was a pair of flashing red eyes staring at him. A small monster that was less than 3 feet tall was silently chanting a long string of strange words. Chapter 691. It was a little monster that was casting a descending spell. Without even looking, Keys knew what the other party was doing. However, he was a little puzzled as to why the dog trainer would send a little monster to take advantage of the explosion to cause trouble. Was it to send him to his death, or to deliver a message? Keys suddenly had some guesses in his heart and immediately put them into practice. The fact that the Emperor was not integrated into the machine proved that this little monster was very talented in illusion. He had 3 glowing blue eyes, long pointed ears, and greasy hair draped over his slightly hunched back like a cloak. At this time, his 3 eyes were slightly flashing, which was a sign that he was concentrating on distorting a person's mind. But what he did not expect was that a palm with an iron glove suddenly reached into the rubble and grabbed him. After being caught, the little monster knew that his strength was not as good as other races, so he did not try to break free by brute force. He used his innate spell ability to release a dark red light wave on the iron glove. Scorching metal. Generally speaking, after being hit by this spell, the metal armor would become like a soldering iron. No matter how strong a human was, if they were suddenly scalded by a soldering iron, they would instinctively take off their metal armor before doing anything else. However, this little monster miscalculated. First, it was not an ordinary human who caught him, but a young blue dragon. Second, the iron glove was not an ordinary metal armor, but the iron hand transformed from Keys's dragon head warhammer hammer. At the same time when he was hit by the spell, a spray gun-like part extended from the iron glove and aimed at the little monster. Puff puff, 2 lines of fire shot out from the muzzle, and the energy that was transmitted by the scorching metal spell just now was all returned to himself. Ow 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 ow, accompanied by a series of miserable howls, the little monster was pulled out from the rubble by Kith. Naturally, his spellcasting was also interrupted, and Mayor Green, who had been hit by the subjugation curse, immediately regained consciousness. "What's wrong with me?" The leader of the 5-city alliance shook his head violently, then hurriedly shouted to the mercenaries and the soldiers of the Steel Fork camp who were still standing on the city wall. "This section of the city wall can't be defended. Go to the surrounding blocks to build defensive positions." At the same time, Keys also confirmed his guess. He grabbed the little devil's neck with his palm and squeezed hard, stopping the cruel troublemakers' ear-piercing screams. Moreover, Keys also found a note in its greasy hair. "The Emperor is determined to obtain the soft maple leaf. His goal is to search the soul of the person who is ignorant." After reading the message, he understood the meaning conveyed by the dog trainer. With a flash of red light, the note and the dead little devil turned into ashes. In the next half an hourglass, the steam tanks outside the city continued to pour artillery fire on the city wall. A full 200 yards of the city wall collapsed and turned into piles of ruins. A few blocks near the city wall were originally vacated as barracks for the Alliance army. Now, it didn't take too much effort to evacuate people. Soon, a defensive line was established from nothing. The soldiers of the Steel Fork camp acted as a transport team. More than 1,000 people and various livestock piled up a large amount of rubble directly on the street, blocking all the road. On the top of the buildings facing the street, Green arranged many archers and long-range attack equipment. The armies of Emerald Wood, Red Pine, Black Willow, and Blue Maple formed a square according to the original battle order. They hid in the corners of some blocks, waiting for the commander's command. The paladins sent by the various temples formed a reinforced reserve team of more than 500 people hidden in several buildings. The priests on duty were running around busily, giving more blessings to these staunch warriors. As for the mayor of Soft Maple, although he couldn't return to the front line because the storm mech was out of fuel, he found a place where he could play a more useful role. The fat mayor led the mercenaries and a group of sailors on the Leviathan that Keyes assigned to him. He visited all the ship owners, caravans, robbers, and rich families that didn't have time to escape Soft Maple City. They did this to eliminate any hidden dangers that might arise, and at the same time, to gather some war resources. Anyone who was good at wielding swords or war materials piled up in warehouses were all temporarily requisitioned by him. Some of them wanted to resist, but in the end, they were all persuaded by the vicious mercenaries and the even more vicious sailors, under quests using physical means. Armed with weapons and equipment, they obediently became a member of the Suicide Squad. Under the pressure of swords, this Suicide Squad of more than 1,000 people was the first to be thrown into the predetermined battlefield, serving as cannon fodder to consume the enemy's offensive strength. There was only one thing they could do, and that was to rely on their own ability to survive in the following battle. And this wasn't an easy task. The Hound Tamer's next attack quickly proved this point. The cyborg monsters that were the fusion of the little monsters and the mechanical chocobos immediately rushed towards Soft Maple City after the steam tank bombardment ended. The Raven men followed closely behind, and the blazing shadow beasts were scattered among these monsters as support. The collapsed city walls formed a defensive vacuum zone. The mechanical chocobos that were as agile as velociraptors stepped on the rubble as if it was flat ground. They were the vanguard and the first batch to rush into Soft Maple City. Due to the different ways in which the little magical creatures were fused with, each magically modified chocobo bird had a different appearance and different abilities. Some of them only added some intelligence to the mechanical chocobo, some gave the machines some simple spell-like abilities, such as Phantom Cantrip, Fire Ignition, Spider Walk. Each of them had their own differences. The first group of resistors who encountered them, the group of glorious members of the Suicide Squad, were punished for this. After all, they weren't a regular army, and most of them were just ordinary people who liked to fight. When faced with the mechanical chocobos that were as tall as horses, these foot soldiers already had some fear. Following that, although the enemy's level wasn't high, but their ability to fall out in a variety of ways caused them to suffer heavy losses. The members of the Suicide Squad who couldn't see through the illusion trick slashed at one of their opponents with all their might, only to find that the opponent had disappeared from the spot with a puff, and in another direction, the sharp beak of the mechanical chocobo had already pecked into his neck. Some members of the Suicide Squad used their agility to scale the roofs of the buildings on the side of the street, but before the regular guards could chase them down to fight, the mechanical chocobo riders, who had mastered the spider art, stepped on the walls and closed in on them. There were also a few members of the bandit group, who formed a small group to resist the enemy. However, the enemy, who was originally attacking them by constantly moving around, released a spell at them in the blink of an eye, lighting them up like candles. Chapter 692. The monsters scored 300 points, and the Suicide Squad scored less than 10 points. Standing on top of a tall building, Smashed Barehead looked down at the battlefield and calculated silently. As a Goliath, he and his people liked to stay in high places, which was why they occupied this tall building as their lookout post. However, not all sailors were like them. The orc wolf riders on the Leviathan ship were busy comforting their dire wolf companions. "Why do we have to stay at such a high place? My pet can't wait to charge into the battlefield," Fezzik complained. However, he couldn't change the current situation, because this was Key's request. The young blue dragon ordered his men not to blindly join the battle. Now was not the time for them to act. Lord Nalu and Mr. Shea are adjusting their weapons. Shredder Bear looked at Fezzik and explained to his comrade, who had fought alongside him. "It won't be long before these streets are razed to the ground." Thinking of the weapons Neru and Shea invented, the orcs could only continue comforting their animal companions. They knew what those two were capable of. If they didn't want to become cannon fodder in the truest sense of the word, it was best to stay here obediently. The Suicide Squad members who were entangled with the modified robotic chocobos in the Barbican, surrounded by the ruins, had no idea what was going to happen next. Of course, they didn't have the time. Because other than the robotic chocobos, there were even more monsters. The noisy raven people, the blazing shadow beasts that could spit molten bombs, and the drooping horse head that flew in a zigzagging pattern, were now pouring into soft Maple City. But relatively speaking, these monsters were easier to deal with than the modified robotic chocobos. At least they weren't as smart as the former, and didn't have as many different tricks up their sleeves. However, most of the Suicide Squad members didn't realize this. They only noticed one thing: there are more monsters swarming in. A sea merchant who once brought people to cause trouble for the Leviathan waved his machete and shouted to his men. Due to the fact that they spent a lot of time at sea, these sailors were much stronger than the usual bandit. That was why they managed to survive the attack of the magically modified chocobo. "Boss White Cotton Cloth, Soft Maple City is not our hometown. We don't have to fight to the death for it." The words shouted out by the subordinate were also the thoughts of the man nicknamed White Cotton Cloth. However, they didn't have much choice now. If they wanted to retreat, the regular army would not hesitate to shoot them with crossbows. If they wanted to surrender to the monsters, the order given by the dog tamer to the monsters did not mention taking captives. "We can't fight on the street. We have to find a building and wait inside." Bai Mianbu quickly made a decision. "That way we might be able to survive for a while. When the regular army and the monsters start fighting, we have to hurry." His words received the agreement of all his men. The 20 of them huddled together and avoided the troublesome, magically modified chocobo. They desperately rushed towards a building with thick walls by the street. But no sooner had they broken into the building, and had just sealed up the windows and doors with discarded furniture and planks, than there was a sudden, blood-curdling, malevolent shriek in everyone's ears. Some of the men who were not strong enough vomited in disgust. Only then did Bai Mianbu realize that there were many strange-looking drooping horse heads on the ceiling. These monsters had the head of a horse with sharp fangs and green eyes, but their bodies were thick and curled tentacles. When his eyes met with the drooping horse heads, the monsters all released their tentacles and fell from the ceiling towards Bai Mianbu and his group of sailors. The monsters took the initiative to attack. Because the doors and windows of the room were blocked, the sailors had limited space to move around. Many of them were quickly entangled by the drooping horse heads. The tentacles on the lower body of the monsters twisted around their necks. Then they used their mouths full of sharp fangs to let out a hissing sound as they gnawed at the sailor's cheek. Actually, these small monsters were not difficult to deal with. As long as the sailors hardened their hearts and used all their strength to attack with the knives in their hands, it would not take long for them to hack these disgusting monsters to death. But the roars of the drooping horse heads were nauseating, and the sailors who had their necks entangled were suffering from suffocation. They could not use all their strength to deal with the enemy. So, one by one, the sailors were gnawed to death by the drooping horse heads. Using the strength of the ram ring on his hand, Bai Mianbu summoned a small force field hammer, smashed through a window that was just blocked, and jumped out. With this, he was able to escape with his few remaining men. However, before they could even catch their breath, An even more terrifying encounter befell this group of unlucky bastards. More than a dozen raven men with crude shields and weapons, as well as a blaze shadow beast with a red glow in its mouth, had surrounded them. Go to hell, monsters! The enormous pressure made them lose their minds, and Bai Mianbu and his men took the initiative to rush into the raven men. At the last moment of his life, Bai Mianbu's blank mind thought of a question. Is it more painful to be torn apart by monsters, or is it more painful to be eaten by sharks in the sea? The latter was what he often did to the merchants he robbed, and the former was the reality he was about to experience. Although he finally obtained the answer, no one knew the answer except for him. Perhaps this was not accurate. After all, many of the members of the Suicide Squad had already experienced the pain of being torn apart by monsters, and there was no lack of pirate leaders who were like Bai Mianbu. We've lost some of those monsters, but there's almost no one left in the Suicide Squad. It's only a matter of time before they're all slaughtered. Standing on the temporary watchtower, Grimm personally observed the battle. Then, the commander of the Alliance army ordered his subordinates to send out a flag signal. Greenwood 1st Phalanx, Red Pine, Black Willow, Blue Maple 1st Phalanx. The target is a group of crowmen gathered at the 4th Street. Although Green had a certain degree of confidence in the strength of his own army because he had never fought with monsters before, he still cautiously adopted a joint attack strategy, allowing a small number of troops to deal with a smaller number of enemies, to find out the details of the monsters. The nearby Scorpion cannons and other long-range troops freely attack the Raven men at the 4th Street. At the same time, provide cover for the soldiers in the square formation. Don't let other monsters interfere with their battle. Chapter 693. Quest actually wanted to say, "You're wasting your time." However, seeing that the leaders of the Alliance army were in high spirits, he simply suppressed this sentence in his stomach. That's fine. If you don't try, you won't know if it's useless. In order to get a better view, they not only built a 20-foot-high observation tower at the top of a tall building, but also raised a hot air balloon at the top of the tower. At a height of nearly 80 feet from the ground, Keys and the mayors of several cities squeezed into the hot air balloon, overlooking the battle between the army of monsters and the Alliance's phalanxes. The phalanxes of the Ramsey people were similar to those in Otherworld. Each phalanx was composed of about 50 people, divided into 3 parts: vanguard, flank, and core. The vanguard was a warrior with a round shield and short spear. They were responsible for receiving the enemy and engaging in hand-to-hand combat. The flank was a long-range archer with a bow and crossbow. They were responsible for attacking the enemy. The core of the formation was a reserve team commanded by the phalanx captain. They were responsible for changing the formation at any time, as well as replacing the wounded in the vanguard and flank. The only difference between the phalanxes and the ones Keys had seen before was that the core of the Ramsey phalanxes were equipped with 5 or 6 alchemists. They were completely obedient to the captain's orders. They could not only save the wounded, but also rely on throwing alchemy potions to kill the enemy. The first phalanx of Emerald Wood City to engage the Raven men on 4th Street was the first phalanx of Emerald Wood City. They were all wearing dark green armor. The warriors in the vanguard wore metal armor, while the warriors on the flanks and in the center of the formation wore lighter leather armor. Following the captain's order, the archers on the flank took the lead and began to rain arrows on the enemy. Many of the Raven men who only used crude shields to resist fell to the ground after being hit by several arrows. However, the vitality of these monsters was much higher than that of the ordinary Ramsey people. They quickly got up and charged at the phalanx of Emerald Wood City with their companions. Vanguard! The phalanx captain immediately ordered. The warriors with shields and short spears immediately responded and stepped forward to block the Raven men's charge. Not only did they use their shields to fiercely slap their opponents' cheeks, the short spears in their hands also looked for openings to stab, bringing out large amounts of blood. Following that, several alchemists who were at the core of the formation threw out the flasks of blazing fire glue in their hands one after another, burning the monsters that were trying to rush towards the frontline warriors. At the same time, the crossbowmen also switched to projectile fire and continued to attack the enemy. Using the flank to lure the enemy, the vanguard to resist the enemy, and the core of the formation to support the enemy, Emerald Wood City's square formation's 3 axes immediately stunned the evil crow men. The monsters gradually understood that the opponents they were fighting were no longer suicide squads, but a regular army. "That's all there is to it," the mayor of Black Willow City, who was standing in the pod, commented. "If the other phalanxes come over together, it won't take long for those monsters to all die here. After all, this is a proper army." As he spoke, he glanced at the others, as if seeking approval. However, other than him, no one would make such an arbitrary judgment so early. They were still observing the situation on the battlefield. "I'm afraid it's not that simple," Keyes said in his heart. As if to confirm his thoughts, the evil crow men suffered setbacks in the early stages, but they were not defeated. Those monsters began to gradually adapt to this way of fighting, and their counterattacks were unexpected and terrifying. Finding that they could not directly break through the vanguard of the square formation, the evil crow men changed their approach and began to approach the sides of the street. Just like how they usually played and hunted on the cliff, they used their sharp claws to clasp the wall and quickly ran on the wall. Then, the evil crow men jumped down from the wall and rushed into the crossbowmen who were pouring arrows at them. Facing the monsters in close combat, the crossbowmen who lacked suitable weapons and skills were not their opponents at all. In just a few breaths, the group of crossbowmen were all silenced, and many of them were even torn apart by the sharp beaks and claws of the evil crow men. Emerald Wood City's square formation suddenly fell into chaos. Although the captain of the square formation had been through hundreds of battles, he had never faced an enemy who could leap over roofs and run on walls before. Originally, he thought about whether he could withdraw the vanguard to protect the flank and the core of the formation. But the evil crow men launched an attack on the vanguard of the square formation first. Those monsters still jumped down from the wall and immediately pressed down several warriors in the vanguard. Although in the process, several evil crow men were stabbed to death by the short spears, almost all of the vanguard of the square formation were pressed to the ground and were all killed by the monsters in a short time. The mayor of Black Willow City could no longer speak. He was full of confidence just now, but reality gave him a punch in the face in the blink of an eye. The soldiers of Emerald Wood City were the most elite force in the Alliance army. But the evil crow men only lost less than 10 people in the square formation of Emerald Wood City that defeated more than 50 people. This kind of loss was unacceptable to him. If the Ramses loss ratio in the face of the monster army was like this, then their combined army might not even be able to survive this battle. And this was just a group of evil crow men. According to the information collected before, the monster army also had blazing shadow beasts and magical mechanical chocobos. Ordinary humans could not compete with them at all. What's more, the Tribulation General who commanded the monster army had not yet made a move, and the Tribulation General's master, the Emperor, had not yet appeared from the protrusion. Even if they desperately resisted the monster army, how would the Tribulation General and the Emperor deal with it? How long before the storm mech can be activated? Green, the leader of the 5-City Alliance, looked at the fat mayor of Soft Maple City. "We can hold on for 2 more hourglasses at most. If there is no way, then Soft Maple City will definitely fall." With that said, there was a trace of anxiety in his eyes. In fact, he was already comforting himself when he said 2 hourglasses. If it were not for the fact that the battle line was now spread out, he even had the idea of ordering the army to withdraw from Soft Maple City. After all, that way, he could still preserve some of his strength and not lose everything. The mayor of Soft Maple City hesitated. After telling a lie, He had to rely on a series of lies to make up for it. He did not say that the storm mech had a malfunction before, and now there was no way to explain this fact. Withdraw your army and let the scorpion cannons and ballista cannons suppress the enemy in the rear, Keyes said. He did not want to ease the embarrassment of the fat mayor, but he wanted to show his strength. My people will temporarily hold the monster army. I also have engineers on my side to solve the problem of the storm mech. Chapter 694. After listening to Keyes's words, the mayors were all skeptical. Although the scale of perpetual order was very powerful, they did not think that the miscellaneous army, made up of sailors, could hold up in the face of monsters that even regular armies could not resist. Sir Keyes, Mayor Green frowned and said, "Are you sure you want your men to cover the retreat and cover the retreat of the Alliance army from this battlefield? This is not a joke." In the face of doubts, Keyes did not refute or explain. He just said in a positive tone, "The battle is not over yet, your army can at least withdraw. If you wait a little longer, I'm afraid there won't be such a good opportunity." Perhaps there were still some doubts in their hearts, but this did not prevent the mayors from thinking rationally. Now it was indeed as Keyes said, their army was not yet in a stalemate with the monsters, at least they could still withdraw from the defensive positions one by one. If they moved faster, it was not impossible to directly withdraw from Soft Maple City. But if they delayed a little longer, the monster army would bite the tail of the army. At that time, let alone retreat, with the degree of devastation on the battlefield, it was estimated that no orders could be carried out. "Retreat, do as he said before," Green decisively said to the attendant in charge of the flag signal. With the flag signal and the herald's quick notification, each square soon received the order from the Alliance Army's commander. The ballistae and scorpion cannons set up on the roof began to fire, and a rain of arrows splashed on the advancing monsters. "The troops over there have retreated." The Goliath warrior, Shatterbarehead, was the first to see the Ramsey army's movements. He turned to Fazak and said, "Pay attention to pacifying your partners, Lord Neru and the others are about to make a move." After saying this, he also reminded several people of his race. They all took out earmuffle-like things, put them on their heads, and firmly tied them with straps. Standing on the top of another tall building, Neru and Shay also received the signal from Keyes. The ogre weapon master showed a carefree smile on his face. Experimenting with the latest weapons was his greatest hobby. "The Megalosaurus has been fused, and the fuel in the Storm Reaver is also full," Shay said to Neru while adjusting the equipment next to him. "Then what are we waiting for?" "You're right. I also want to collect some of the operating parameters of the engineering goblin's creations." So, Shay contacted Megalosaurus with a wireless device. "The stage is ready. It's your turn." It turned out that Keyes did not refer to the crew on the Leviathan, but to the clockwork Megalosaurus he had created on the front lines of the Blood War. 2 days ago, he saw the hound tamer of the Storm Mecha battle. In his excitement, Keyes had secretly checked on the mech. When he discovered that the mech had been locked by the dwarves using a special secret key, Keyes decisively used brute force to break it. He took out the clockwork Megalosaurus that had turned into an alarm clock and had it fuse into the locked Storm mechanical suit. Just like that, the Storm mech, which had no AI program, was forcefully taken over by a mechanical construct. The secret key that the dwarves had stuffed into the beast-shaped keyhole was also pushed out of the Storm mech's body. After solving this problem, Keyes asked Shay to help the clockwork Megalosaurus optimize the performance of the Storm mech and adjust the size of the cockpit. In this way, the burly ogre Neru naturally became the first pilot of this Storm Mecha modified. His task was to show the true strength of this weapon and let the Five-City Alliance see the foundation of the Scales of Eternity Chamber of Commerce at the same time. "I can't wait." Looking at the Storm mech flying from afar, Neru suddenly returned to his original figure. He jumped from the roof into the air and stretched his body into the shape of the Chinese character. Just as Nehru started to fall, the storm mech flew behind him. The belly compartment opened and wrapped the ogre inside, completing a rather superhero-style mech suit. After knowing the name of this mech, Keyes was very dissatisfied with its lack of flight ability. What right did a mech without flight ability have to be crowned with the name Storm? So when the Clockwork Megalosaurus was optimizing it, it first made up for this shortcoming of the Storm mech, making it worthy of its name. Using the powerful airflow of the engine, the mech gained the ability to sprint and fly. After completing the outfit, Nehru directly unlocked the first combat module of the Storm mech according to the manual he was already familiar with. At the same time, the Storm mech hit Rhoda hard. Due to the Clockwork Megalosaurus modification, the Storm mech was originally very powerful, but it was also equipped with a Clockwork Overload ability that allowed the engine to explode for a short time. Like a spider, tentacles with wheel saws extended out, Nehru controlled the Storm mech to perform a dance of death. Like cutting tofu, the wheel saws spun and crushed the buildings, cutting them into pieces. The monsters hiding in the buildings, like the drooping horse head, did not put up any effective resistance and were all crushed under the rubble. The Raven men were in a similar situation. With no buildings to climb, they did not have the opportunity to use their leap over walls ability at all. These monsters were chased around by the Storm mech, and if they ran a little slower, they would have been turned into a pile of minced meat. Only the blazing shadow beast and the magically modified chocobo had long-range attacks, and they tried to shoot at the Storm mech with molten bullets and magically modified gnomish firearms. However, this level of attack could not penetrate the armor of the Storm mech. Some of the monsters even tried to use illusions to influence the Storm mech, but the pilot of this war machine was not the previous mayor of Soft Maple, but the war maniac, Nehru. Facing the illusions, the ogre did not have any fear or hesitation. He used the most direct method, brute force, and waved the Storm mech's tentacles of death and swept towards them. No matter what illusions were created, for the Storm mech pilot who was determined to flatten this area, it was all a waste of mana and had no effect. On the other hand, if the monsters did not dodge in time and were swept by the wheel saws, they would definitely die. There was no other possibility. Just like the Kong-style stealth, as long as I kill everyone, then no one can find me sneaking in here. Nehru was also using his own method to reinterpret the tactic of covering the retreat. As long as all the enemies were killed, then it would provide the best support for the retreat of the Allies. Chapter 695. That's enough. Keyes used his psionic ability to contact Na Lu. Give the enemy some breathing room. The ogre was indeed worthy of his title of Weapon Master. Although it was also his first time piloting a mech, the fat mayor of Soft Maple City was much more impressive. Under his control, the Storm mech was like a real storm, sweeping away all the monsters that rushed into the city. He had now activated the second set of combat modules of the mech, turning it into a big round iron ball, repeatedly crushing the rubble of the collapsed buildings. Any monsters that did not escape from Soft Maple City were all crushed into flat ground, along with the ruins of the buildings. In the end, the mech stopped directly in the gap of the collapsed city wall, firmly blocking the defensive loophole. After his explanation, everyone who watched the battle between the mech and the monsters had a new understanding of covering the rear. What's going on? Looking at the ogre walking out of the mech, the fat mayor could not help but ask Keyes. Although he lowered his voice, it could not hide the anger in it. As the excavator of the Storm mech, and the only pilot before, the mayor of Soft Maple City clearly regarded the mech as his personal property. Therefore, when he saw the originally locked mech first rise into the air, then attach itself to Na Lu's body, then jump into the army of monsters and directly activate Peerless, the mayor felt as if he had been poured into a bottle of vinegar that had been fermenting for more than 30 years. It was so sour that it was difficult to feel any more sour. The storm mech. He wanted to say the word lockdown, but considering that the space in the pod was not big, and the other mayors might be able to hear him, he could only vaguely ask, "Did you guys do it?" "Of course not." Keys shrugged. He did not want to be the scapegoat for the gnomes. The first ones to come into contact with the storm mech were the investigators from Dwarf Island. As he spoke, he took out a key engraved with gnomish characters. This is the secret key that they obtained from the master craftsman. It's also an accessory that was given to them by the ancient engineering gnomes when they delivered the goods. Keys continued to explain, as he saw that the fat mayor seemed to have understood something, but at the same time, there was still some doubt on his face. The scale of perpetual order is far beyond your imagination. To us, those ancient secrets are not as mysterious as you think. The storm mech had been used for over 100 years, and the ancient Ramses had long since learned how to repair it. Coincidentally, someone in our Chamber of Commerce has mastered this mecha maintenance technique. The mayors of the other cities had already been attracted by his words, so Keys did not hesitate to promote his own business. No matter if it is this storm mecha or any other mecha that you may find, the Scales of Eternity Merchant Guild can provide excellent post-production maintenance and repair, as long as you can pay the right price. Why isn't the storm mech moving? Is it because there is no fuel? Asked Green, the commander of the Union Army. In fact, the answer was no. After being fused with Megalosaurus, the soul of Megalosaurus itself could provide sufficient power for the storm mech. Just now, it had only fought for less than half an hourglass, and only 1/3 of the new light and heavy oil had been used. Under the premise that the third group of combat modules had not been activated, the storm mech would have had no problem fighting for an hourglass. However, Keys had his own plans. He did not want the Union Army to continue to stay here and fight to the death with the Emperor's army because they had seen the power of the storm mech. In the young Blue Dragon's expectation, the fight against the Emperor would be a major event that would mobilize all the human cities in the Ramsey world, and this was related to his plan to deal with Stim later. Therefore, he had to withdraw the army of the Five-City Alliance and send all the citizens of Soft Maple City to the various human cities in Ramsey to spread the horror of the Emperor and his forces. So, you're right, Keys confirmed Mayor Green's reasonable guess. A war machine like the storm mech requires an astonishing amount of fuel to operate. The battle that lasted half an hourglass not only consumed all the fuel that all the alchemists in Soft Maple City had made in 2 days, but the raw materials used to refine the fuel in the city have also been used up. What, then? His words made the other mayors' hearts, which had just been relieved, rise to their throats again. They had already seen the power of the monster army. If they didn't have the storm mech that could rival it, it would be no different from directly ordering the Alliance's army to die. So, we have to retreat. Key's words surprised everyone, but it was not without some truth. And it's not just the army that has to retreat. While the storm mech has just deterred the monster army, we have to mobilize all the citizens of Soft Maple City to evacuate together. With the army as a cover, we can evacuate more people. This can also reduce more people being captured by the monsters and then twisted into new monsters. Emerald Wood City, Red Pine City, Black Willow City, and Blue Maple City are responsible for taking in these refugees and establishing a government in exile in Soft Maple City. Next, we need to appeal to all the human cities in Ramsey to join the alliance against the Emperor. In addition to retreating, Keys also made a suggestion that was quite in the style of the 9 prisons of Bader. In addition to retreating, we have to scorch the walls and clear the fields, not leaving a city for the Emperor to ask for resources. If we can take away food, take it away, and if we can't, poison it. Let the alchemists withdraw as the last batch. We have to leave enough horses and guards for them. Before leaving, we have to fill Soft Maple City with blazing fire glue and impact oil. When the monsters enter the city, we will raze it to the ground. Although the mayor of Soft Maple City did not agree with Key's suggestion, the situation was different. Not only did the other mayors think it was a good idea, but even the mercenary group leader under him agreed. Instead of leaving it to the monsters, it's better to turn this city into their tomb, the veteran replied to his employer. If it weren't for the lack of time, we'd even better to dig up the newly buried bodies and burn them, lest they all turn into monsters in the end and turn around to fight us again. Chapter 696. The retreat plan was carried out in an orderly manner. Unlike a well-trained army, it would take a longer time to gather the citizens and retreat. Therefore, the leaders of the alliance decided to give them 6 hourglasses to collect their belongings. During this time, the alliance's main responsibility was to clear out a reliable retreat route. With the monster army outside the city eyeing them covetously, they could not open the city gates and retreat, so they had to find another way. In this regard, the fat mayor of Soft Maple City made a great contribution. He found the new head of the thieves in the city. After Weather's disappearance, an unknown thief appeared and inherited Old Karen's legacy. He tortured the thief. Thanks to the bandit's confession, the leaders of the alliance knew about the secret passage in Sharon's tavern. They immediately sent people to widen and strengthen it. The first batch of workers were members of the Suicide Squad who were lucky enough to survive the battlefield. They carried shovels on their shoulders, and their eyes were filled with fear. The soldiers were in charge of supervising and watching over them. Occasionally, a few roars could be heard from the dark tunnel, like a dying volcano muttering to itself. To them, who had faced the monster army, these sounds were not good memories. There are no monsters in there, just some alchemically trained ankegs, the mercenary leader explained to the laborers patiently as he sat on a short table beside the tunnel. It turned out that in order to speed up the construction, the fat mayor of Soft Maple City mobilized some alchemists to help. Each of them brought along an ankeg that was usually used to produce alchemy materials. Although it had the word worm in its name, ankegs were not insects, but magic beasts. They were about the size of a horse when they reached adulthood. They had 6 legs and a shovel-shaped upper jaw. Usually, alchemists would collect the secretions from the ankeg's mouths as alchemy materials. It was a thick corrosive liquid that had a certain degree of acidity. But with a little processing, it could be made into a very good dissolving agent. In addition, the old skin that the ankegs shed every year could be used to make some corrosive alchemy containers. However, the reason they brought the ankegs here was to let them use their special ability to dig. Their jaws and feet are perfect for digging. Other than the frozen soil and rocks with more metal minerals, the ankegs' digging speed in soft soil, sand, and gravel was absolutely astonishing. Moreover, the thick, corrosive liquid secreted from their mouths allowed the ankegs to strengthen the hole they dug, turning it into a sturdy tunnel. With the help of these little digging experts, the laborers were only there to help move the soil and gravel dug out by the ankegs. After the tunnel was widened and reinforced, the alchemists left with their ankegs. They still had to make use of the time to refine blazing fire glue and impact oil. The first to enter the tunnel was the leader of the rebel army, who had not had much of a presence for the past 2 days. When Rake came to Soft Maple City, he wanted to talk to Keys, but he only got a reply of "let's wait for 2 days." At first, he was still a little dissatisfied, and there were some gaps in his heart, but after witnessing the battle that broke out after the monster army rushed into the Soft Maple City, all these emotions disappeared. Now was not the time to chat, and he had to wait for 2 more days. The reason why he was the first to enter was because this tunnel led directly to the outskirts of Jin Village. He had to bring people back to the village first, evacuate the villagers and the rebel army, and lead them to Emerald Wood City 1 step ahead. Following him was a black-armored knight who was always by Grimm's side. With him, Rake and the others did not have to worry about being intercepted by the garrison of Emerald Wood City. It was convenient for them to evacuate quickly. After walking for about an hourglass, the group finally reached the end of the tunnel. In fact, if it was not for the torches that were installed at intervals on the walls of the tunnel, they could have walked out in half an hourglass. This is only half a league away from Jin village. Standing in a circle of graves, Rake was a little speechless. But for several years, no one has discovered that there is a secret tunnel that leads directly to Soft Maple City. It must be because this place is too remote. There are usually no people or anything. Rake's men echoed, but the black-armored knight who followed Rake did not say anything. He just cautiously looked around. Since they had walked out of the tunnel, Rake did not waste any more time. He led the group of people out of the cemetery quickly and came to a man-made path. They walked towards the direction of Jin village. There was a thin layer of snow in the forest, and when they stepped on it, it made a rustling sound. At this time, night had quietly fallen, and the path in the forest became darker. A rebel soldier behind Rake took out a lantern and wanted to light it. "Don't light it." The black-armored knight who had been silent the whole time quickly came to the soldier and grabbed his wrist. "Something doesn't feel right. I think I smell blood." Because of the black-armored knight's reminder, Rake immediately reacted. He immediately took out a small leather bag, squeezed out a little bit of dark red ointment, and then quickly rubbed it into his nostrils. This was an alchemy potion called Hound's Blood, which could enhance the user's sense of smell for a short period of time. With the help of the external object, Rake also confirmed that the black-armored knight was not lying. There was indeed a faint smell of blood in the air. Rake immediately thought of the monster army that they encountered in the past few days. Not good. The Juniper village might have been attacked by the monsters. The guards here can't stop those vicious monsters. Years of leading troops in war had given this rebel leader, who was originally an alchemist, an ability to resist pressure that far exceeded his peers. Rake did not order his men to go to Jin village. Instead, he stretched out his hand and used sign language to tell them to disperse and not let the possible enemies surround them. Then, he glanced at the black-armored knight and saw him nodding at him. This group of people carefully took out their weapons, lowered their bodies, and slowly moved in the direction of Jin village. Chapter 697. What would the end of the world look like? Perhaps everyone had an answer in their heart. But in the eyes of Harrow and his men, the end of the world was nothing more than this. This scene was the end of the world. When they reached the edge of Juniper village, the smell of blood in the air was very obvious. Everyone could smell it. The camp was made of logs, and there were already large holes in it. The tragic scene was unreservedly reflected in everyone's eyes. Cocoons were almost all over the village. Some were big and some were small, but without exception they were all broken. The pitter-patter of pus mixed with blood flowed onto the small path in the village, forming a small disgusting pool. The sun was setting, but there was no light in the entire Juniper village. Only a few jackals that sneaked into the village from the forest surrounded the small pond and drank. They looked up from time to time with green light in their eyes. It must be the king's men. Seeing the tragic scene in Juniper village, a rebel soldier said viciously. He had relatives and friends living in the village. Those disgusting monsters must be killed. Harrow stared at him, but did not refute his words. The situation was obvious. Juniper village was attacked by a general. The villagers were all turned into monsters and now they were all taken away. Kill those jackals, Harrow thought for a moment and ordered. Don't care about those cocoons. When the people in the city evacuate, let them see this scene. Let them know that if they don't want to become monsters that are neither human nor ghost, they have to run quickly. The black-armored knight beside Rake suddenly stretched out his finger. Look over there. Following his reminder, everyone looked at the pack of jackals that were foraging for food. Those guys who drank the corpse fluid seemed to be mutating too. Under everyone's surprised gaze, the facial muscles and hair of the jackals that drank the corpse fluid began to peel off. Not long after, their skulls and bright red tendons were completely exposed. However, they didn't seem to have realized that something was wrong with them. They are mutating into bone-faced spotted beasts. Harrow was an alchemist. He was more knowledgeable than the others. He immediately recognized what kind of creature those jackals had mutated into. They are turning into magic beasts. His exclamation did not elicit any reaction from the others. Everyone, including the black-armored knight, except for Harrow, was just a bunch of bloodthirsty thugs. Naturally, they didn't have much knowledge. They lacked a basic understanding of the technology that could allow ordinary natural creatures to mutate into magical beasts. "Are we still fighting or not, boss?" one of the rebel soldiers asked. Rake nodded. He knew how strong the bone-faced spotted beast was. With the strength of the dozen of them, it was not too dangerous to deal with a few bone-faced spotted beasts. Thus, the rebel soldiers picked up their weapons and crawled into the hole in the wall. The black-armored knight followed closely behind, holding a battle axe in his hand and standing beside Rake, supporting the group of soldiers. Seeing that someone was attacking them, the group of jackals that were mutating into the bone-faced, spotted beast immediately reacted. They raised their pale heads and let out a low growl. Then, they turned around and charged over. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, 3 consecutive arrows were shot from a rebel soldier's bow and hit the bone-faced, spotted beast that was running at the front. It was the largest and the fastest, so it naturally received the most care. As it turned out, although the jackals had mutated, they did not become much stronger. Of the 3 arrows, other than the one that hit the exposed skull, the other 2 did not bounce off and successfully hit the target. With just a whimper, the beast that looked like the leader of the jackals fell to the ground. It was even stabbed a few more times by the rebel soldiers. It did not take long for the rest of the mutated jackals to be slaughtered by the soldiers. Rake ordered his men to drag the dead jackals together and dig a hole to bury them. "It's not convenient to start a fire now. Later, we'll put up a sign here. When the city's army comes, they'll set these things on fire." Then, he personally mixed some alchemy potions and sprinkled them around Juniper Village. These potions emitted a pungent smell that could disperse the insects in the forest and prevent them from entering the village to drink the blood of the mutated creatures. After doing all this, more than an hourglass had passed. They hurriedly went to a permanent stronghold run by the rebels to prepare for the evacuation. The rest could only be left to the troops that evacuated from Soft Maple City. After about 4 or 5 hourglasses, sparse flames lit up in the forest. The troops of Red Pine City and Emerald Wood City came out of the secret passage. They flattened the cemetery at the exit of the secret passage and opened up a path from the exit to Juniper Village. Then, nearly 60,000 civilians of Soft Maple City were half-driven and half-willingly through the tunnel and set foot on the forest path that had just been consolidated. Although there were some troubles during the evacuation process, the regular soldiers of Black Willow and Blue Maple, who were scattered among the civilians in the form of squads, suppressed the chaos and ensured that the evacuation was completed in an orderly manner. During the entire evacuation process, the fat mayor of Soft Maple City also led his mercenaries and Steel Fork Battalion soldiers to do their best to maintain the order of the team. At this moment, except for some properties and furniture that could not be taken away, Soft Maple City was almost empty. Only the alchemists responsible for the production of blazing fire glue and impact oil, as well as Keyes's group, did not leave. "How's the preparation of the caravan?" Keyes asked Fizak, who was in charge of this work. The other party immediately gave an affirmative answer, and at the same time reported the escape route that they had just planned. As the last batch of troops to evacuate, the alchemists could not leave with the rest of the troop. They could only take carriages and Keyes's men to break through the southwest gate of Soft Maple City and take the main road to Emerald Wood City. However, unlike the ordinary civilians, they would be protected by the scale of perpetual order. At the same time, because there were fewer people, The animals used to pull the carriages were more affluent, so they might even reach Emerald Wood City faster than the group of civilians who left first. In the latter half of the night, when everything was ready, Keyes directly ordered all the torches on the city wall to be lit, and then let Nala drive the storm mech to move away the blocked city gate. The monster army that had been squatting outside the city also noticed the abnormality in the city. As the commander, the dog trainer immediately ordered, "The opponent's mech must have run out of fuel. Now is our chance to replenish it." The monster army that was inspired by these words instantly charged at Soft Maple City again, as if they had been injected with chicken blood, and very smoothly spread throughout the city. But at this moment, the figures of the guards of Soft Maple City on the city wall suddenly disappeared one by one, and this already empty city ushered in its most dazzling moment. Countless flames and explosions suddenly appeared in Soft Maple City. Keyes, who was already sitting in a caravan, also confirmed that the Leviathan had sunk to the bottom of the sea and was heading to the predetermined location. He looked up at the city behind him that he had been in for more than 10 days and could not help but sigh. The artistic level is still not very good. Chapter 698. In Dwarf Island, inside the steam dome, the master craftsman's chapel, a shrill, angry roar rang out. "How can we take this lying down?" An elder sitting on a maglev chair leapt off his chair, slamming the long table in front of him, as he yelled. The master craftsman couldn't help but nod approvingly at the elder who was known as the Dwarf of Dwarfs. Right now, he was hoping that someone would stand up and say something similar, but no one in the hall responded. Have even the elders of the dwarfs fallen to such a state? The master craftsman was filled with sorrow, but he couldn't say those words aloud. Because if he did, he would become a traitor who had betrayed the dwarf god, and an outcast of Dwarf Island. As the oldest dwarf on the island, the master craftsman had lived for almost 600 years, and he believed in the leader of the dwarf gods, Jar Dazzling. In other words, he was the purest kind of dwarf. However, among the elders present, he was the only one who was a believer of Jar Dazzling. Moreover, apart from the elder who had just roared in anger and was a believer of Flando Steelhide, the dwarf god of forging, the rest of the elders all believed in the young dwarf god who was born in Ramsey, the god of virtual games, Stim. If not for the master craftsman presiding over the meeting, the elders would have already begun discussing the latest virtual games in Stim's house, such as walkthroughs, competitive experiences, or game commentary. They weren't interested in anything else, and at the same time lacked enthusiasm. If they weren't made of flesh and blood and still needed to eat, drink, go to the toilet, and sleep, these dwarfs would probably be immersed in the world of games for 24 hours a day. What made the master craftsman even more worried was that there were plenty of game addicts like them on Dwarf Island. Ever since His Majesty Stim succeeded in ascending to godhood, more and more dwarfs began to stop working and indulge in virtual games all day long. Right now, of the 7 elders holding the meeting in the Steam Dome, 5 of them were believers of the god of virtual games, a drastic change that would have been unimaginable hundreds of years ago. A large number of gnomes were addicted to games, which almost caused Gnome Island to wither away. Even if he had found a way, inspired by Gar Dazzling, whose emblem was the gold nugget, the master craftsman had invented a stable financial system that could rely on Ramsey's human society to support all the gnomes on Gnome Island. However, as an old-school dwarf, the master craftsman didn't believe that dwarf inventions could be maintained forever. That would be very unfitting of a dwarf. This system had been running for nearly 400 years, and he had a vague feeling that it had been stable for long enough. As the inventor of the financial system, he knew very well what kind of disaster would befall Dwarf Island if this system suddenly collapsed one day. However, apart from him, none of the other dwarves on Dwarf Island seemed to have realized this. They're becoming less and less like dwarfs, maintaining the concept of being vigilant in times of peace, and before the invention goes out of control, Inventing another creation that can be remedied is the proper way of a dwarf. The master craftsman couldn't help but feel a little anxious as he looked at the dispirited dwarven elders with panda eyes. They must have been playing virtual games all night yesterday. We have to think of a way. Dwarf Island is still too comfortable now, and they all need a little pressure. Perhaps the revival of the Emperor is such an opportunity. In the master craftsman's mind, the dwarf sovereign was an omnipotent being. No matter how powerful the Emperor was, he was just a mere mortal. And yet, that mortal was able to open the seal that Gar Dazzling's incarnation had personally placed. That was why the master craftsman had always suspected that this was a test that the dwarf sovereign had designed specifically for Ramses' gnomes. That was why, even though Flando Steelhide's believer wanted to make a move, the rest of the elders still looked like nerds. However, the master craftsman finally made the decision to have Dwarf Island join the war against the Emperor. From today onwards, Dwarf Island will enter a state of combat readiness. All generators will be prioritized for the use of the docks, weapons processing factories, warrior training grounds, and flying machine research centers. His Majesty Stim's game stores, be it the Stim House, that is open for business, or the Stim Family Shrine, that is privately owned, will all be reduced by 2 hourglasses per day. Originally, the master craftsman had wanted to reduce the power supply by at least half a day, but due to the fierce opposition of the elders, he could only compromise and reduce the power supply by 2 hourglasses per day. However, during these 2 hourglasses, the gnomes had to go to various departments to do voluntary work. They were absolutely not allowed to rest at home so that they could continue playing the game the next day. As a result, the entire dwarf island was filled with cries. Some of the gnomes even spontaneously gathered in front of the steam dome to demonstrate their protest. However, the master craftsman didn't care at all. He steeled his heart and sealed the doors of the steam dome, using the pipes around the building to spew out high-temperature steam to forcefully disperse and scald away the gnomes who dared to cause trouble. The Ramsey gnomes understood the master craftsman's intentions. He was determined to have Dwarf Island join the war, and this decision wouldn't be changed by anyone's will. Fortunately, the gnomes weren't inflexible. Since things had already come to this, the most important thing now was how to quickly end the war. For a moment, all the large gnome families began to contact their agents among the humans of Ramsey, the various large commercial guilds that Ramsey spoke of. The gnomes expressed that as long as they could quickly end the war, they were willing to give the commercial guilds more business rights and pay more gemstone coins to form an adequate army. At the same time, the gnomes imitated the strategy used by Stim when operating the virtual game, and developed a public reward system. All the humans of Ramsey could use their achievements in fighting against the Emperor's forces to exchange for gemstone coins. They even listed killing or resealing the Emperor as the top prize, and the reward was the production method of cat's eye emerald coins. In other words, as long as they could obtain this reward, the human would have gemstone coins that theoretically could never be spent. However, in the eyes of the master craftsman, these actions of the gnomes were a form of laziness. He didn't think that the Ramsey people alone would be able to fight against the Emperor's army of monsters. Moreover, the highest reward didn't have any practical meaning. Even if someone knew the production method of cat's eye emerald coins, wouldn't Dwarf Island adjust the exchange rate and declare this currency invalid one day and replace it with new gemstone coins? It's better to have action than nothing. Being able to participate in this war is better than playing games at home. In the end, the master craftsman could only comfort himself like this. Chapter 699. I've experienced excitement and I've also experienced boredom. But in my opinion, it's better to be boring. Old Bobby followed the team and walked slowly. While walking, he secretly thought about the various kinds of excitement in the past few days. In the past few days, the owner of the North Wind Tavern first experienced a new high in turnover, and then suffered the loss of the tavern. Life's ups and downs were nothing more than this. But he had to admit that leaving Soft Maple was the right choice. There were more and more people who had the same opinion as him. For ordinary proletarians, there was only one way to make a living. As for those who had their own businesses in Soft Maple, after seeing the tragic state of Juniper Village, they all changed their original thoughts. After all, becoming a monster and not being able to rest in peace after death was far more terrible than losing property. The long team passed through the forest, and the soldiers on horseback patrolled from time to time. These riders were responsible for driving away the beasts in the forest, and at the same time, they had to be on guard against the various variables that would cause chaos in the team. Every once in a while, the team would take a short break. The soldiers would drag out the previously identified unstable factors. The villains who bullied women and children, the thieves who couldn't control their own hands, and the rich dogs who robbed other civilians' livestock. The priests of the gods would cast a spell to detect those people. Whenever there was a red light on their body, the soldiers standing behind them would raise their swords and punish them. As for those who didn't have a dazzling red name, their hands were tied and handed over to the Soft Steel Fork Battalion. However, their names had been recorded in the roster of the Death Squad. Because there were as many as 60,000 refugees in this team, the route previously provided by the rebel leader Rake became unsuitable. Mayor Green had to send soldiers to open up a new road, cut down trees, break vines, and crush shrubs. Only in this way could the people, livestock, and carts behind them pass smoothly. Emerald Wood City was located in the southwest direction of Soft Maple City, separated by a stretch of hills. Because they didn't take the main road, the team walked for about 3 days before arriving at the border of Emerald Wood City. Fortunately, the Emperor's troops seemed to have been delayed by Mr. Quitha's plan, and there were no attacks from the monster army along the way. And as the team gradually left Soft Maple, the abnormal cold didn't continue to torture them. But even so, after 3 days of marching and retreating, they still lost nearly 3,000 men, including hundreds of criminals who were executed, the old and weak who died of hunger and cold, and some civilians who fell behind for unknown reasons. But in view of the current situation, the 5 city alliance's mayors could accept this result, and the loss of personnel was even lower than they expected. Emerald Wood City's defense came to support this team. This team was the 3rd team they received in 3 days. After seeing the Black Armored Knights by Harrow's side, the soldiers who stayed behind to guard Emerald Wood City believed that the rebels who had arrived at Emerald Wood City had been properly settled. Soon after, the alchemists who had broken out of the encirclement with Quest's men also arrived at Soft Maple City. Under the command of the Black Armored Knights, this batch of alchemists all had their own new jobs. Together with the Emerald Wood City's alchemists, they had begun to prepare various kinds of alchemy potions for the upcoming war. After working hard for several days, the group of people who escaped from Soft Maple City finally settled down in Emerald Wood City. The Green family had operated in this city for hundreds of years, so it wasn't too difficult to settle 50 to 60,000 people. The city's craftsmen opened up an area outside Emerald Wood City and cut enough wood from the forest to build simple houses. Then, with the help of the Emerald Wood City's able-bodied men, a town for temporary settlement was built. The original Fat Mayor, at this time, led the mercenaries to become the town's manager, and the Steel Fork Battalion was incorporated into the Emerald Wood City's defense force to undergo retraining. Those who didn't pass the assessment were eliminated. After that, Mayor Green didn't personally involve himself in the situation here. He focused most of his energy on finding the hidden mecha in Jadewood City. According to Keyes, these ancient war machines were all the last means to prevent the resurrection of the generals. Therefore, he quickly circled the location of the mecha's excavation, the legendary place where the generals were sealed in Emerald Wood City. But after digging for a while, they didn't find anything that looked like a mecha. Instead, they confirmed that the tomb where the generals were sealed had indeed been robbed and the coffin had disappeared. In the Green family's mansion. His name is Shirgu, Green said with a sullen face. Several retainers who were listening to his instructions were all lying on the ground in fear and trepidation. The thick blanket was obviously very warm, but they all felt cold all over. He is the enemy of all the Ramsey people, a general under the ancient slave master emperor. His tomb was obviously a forbidden area, but now it has been rebuilt into a commercial district. You are responsible for the planning and construction of Emeraldwood City, so you must be responsible for the approval of this reconstruction project. Who was the merchant at that time and how much benefits did he give you? You actually dared to privately agree to demolish the forbidden area and build houses on it. No, you want to build a whole block? The several retainers were shivering like sieves, but none of them dared to answer Green's question. Seeing this, Emeraldwood City's lord couldn't help but coldly snort, and a group of private soldiers wearing black law enforcement uniforms walked out. Without saying anything, the group of private soldiers were like eagles catching chicks, carrying the retainers away in pairs. Your crimes are simply unforgivable. Go and write down the details of the merchant who developed the commercial district. I can spare the life of the one who wrote the most and in the most detail for the time being. As for the rest, escort them to Shing Peak in half an hourglass and push them to their deaths in Burial Valley. Mayor Green's cold words were transmitted to those people's ears word for word. In Emeraldwood City, there was no law more effective than the words of House Master Green. If he said that he wanted to execute those who didn't write enough and in enough detail, then they would definitely be executed. Thus, each and every one of them did their best to recall every detail of the transaction from a few years ago. They wished they could clearly remember the merchant's voice and smile, and then write as detailed as possible. The merchant they are talking about is probably the same as Sharon in Soft Maple City, a monster spy in disguise. Ignoring the several derelict officials who were pushed away, Keyes, who was standing next to Green, crossed his arms and gave his opinion. I'm afraid it will be very difficult to find him now. Then, there is no need for those good-for-nothings to continue living. Now, not only Emeraldwood City, but all of the Ramsey people already have no room to maneuver. Green agreed with this point of view, nodding and coldly saying. Chapter 700. I have a guess, Keyes thought for a moment, then continued. The Calamity Generals, Madam, and Emperor all have their own characteristics, and their abilities are different. In order to deal with their resurrection, the ancient Ramsey people and dwarves hid war machines near the seals that could deal with them. So how could these war machines be exactly the same? Mayor Green nodded. Although he didn't actually understand, it didn't prevent him from being a good listener. Keyes's guess actually originated from the two Calamity Generals he had in his hands. Foolish Opinion and a Soul Search. They had completely different abilities. Foolish Opinion was the product of the one-eyed hawk monster's transformation, while Soul Search was a soul power mage. The storm mech of Soft Maple City was indeed the only magic weapon that could restrain the monster army. Once it was activated, ordinary monsters couldn't resist its attack at all. However, in the face of Foolish Opinion and a Soul Search's ability, the Storm Mech's ability didn't seem to be too right. The mech was invincible on the battlefield, but could it solve the rumors spread by Foolish Opinion? Soul Search's soul power spell couldn't break through the many coatings of the Storm Mech, but bypassing the mech, the Calamity General could completely control ordinary people to cause great chaos and cause great destruction. Since the ancient dwarves and the Ramsey people left behind a backup plan, presumably that backup plan was also targeted. Around every sealed monster leader, there must be some kind of war machine that could restrain its ability. There were also many types of mech. Not all the mechs buried in the city were of the Storm Mech type. Breaking it apart, crushing it, and explaining it to Mayor Green again, This supreme commander of the Alliance army finally understood what Quest meant. You're saying that the mech buried in Emeraldwood City might not be the storm mech, or that the mech was buried in the first place, but it might be hidden in another form. Hearing him say this, Keyes knew that the other party understood what he meant. That's right, through the information collected so far, as well as the materials we found from various ancient books, Shirgu is likely to be a calamity general transformed from an undead creature like the hunting corpse. His most important job is to search for prey for the Emperor to replenish the monster army. Other than the ability to devour bones to form arrows, his ability to move at high speeds was his most unique ability. If Emeraldwood City has a mech, then this mech will most likely be able to limit Shredder's speed. Limit the opponent's speed. Following the train of thought led by Keyes, Glenn fell into deep thought. He suddenly thought of something that might fit this characteristic. Leading Keyes and his black-armored knights, he walked into a drawing room inside the Green family mansion. This is a drawing room. In the past, every time there was an expansion project in Emeraldwood City, the craftsmen would draw sketches here. There was a rather strange tradition here, and that was to draw as slowly as possible. If a cartographer draws too fast and makes any mistakes, according to the ancient code of Emeraldwood City, they will suffer 3 days of imprisonment. Green explained to Keyes. There are some contradictions, right? Keyes also heard the problem. If there was even the slightest mistake, the draftsman would be imprisoned. This tradition could be said to be very strict. But with such a strict tradition, a mere 3 days of imprisonment was unavoidably too lenient. It was as if the Green family head who left behind this tradition was playing around, or perhaps, he deliberately left behind such a contradictory tradition so that future generations would remember this drawing room. Walking into the drafting room, they saw a map of Emeraldwood City that took up an entire wall. This map was already several hundred years old, and the location marked on it was also different from the current Emeraldwood City. But the whole map showed no signs of mottling falling off, and every line was still as clear as before. The paper of this map is all tanned from the skin of the mountain giant. The ink used to draw the map should be the precious indigo, which can guarantee that it won't fade or peel off for several hundred years. Coming to the side of the map, Glenn stretched out his hand and stroked it. This map was a treasure of the Glenn family. Every generation's head of the family would instruct their descendants to keep it well, and not to move its position or deface the pattern on it. Therefore, even Mayor Glenn had never reached out to touch this map before. Shirgu's tomb should be. He pressed his palm lightly on the map and stroked the lines on it until he reached the location of the seal. Here, there's a sunken place. Find me a dagger. The black-armored knight, who was not far from him, immediately handed over a dagger. With a piercing sound, Glenn quickly dug out a big hole in this precious map. There was a secret compartment hidden in the wall behind the map. Imprisonment for 3 days. Looking at the knob-like object in the secret compartment, Glenn decisively reached his hand in and twisted it 3 times. Immediately after, the wall with the map on it began to tremble slightly. A secret door slowly opened. The few of them entered the secret door one by one and walked down the stairs behind the door 1 step at a time. Finally, they arrived at a spacious basement. The black-armored knight held a lantern in his hand, but the range of illumination was still not enough. Keyes snapped his fingers, and several small balls shining with white light flew out and floated above everyone's heads. Under the illumination of the eternal flame, they finally saw what was in front of them. There were more than 50 crates placed in the middle of the room, but none of them were on top of the other crates. Glenn walked to a box and wanted to open it, but found that the gap between the lid had been sealed with beeswax. So, he could only use the dagger again to carefully cut it open and then open the box. There were 2 things in the box: an operation manual and a strange-looking mechanical creation, an honorary product of the Spanner family. Standing behind Glenn, Keyes saw the printed handwriting on the cover of the operation manual and suddenly remembered his two former comrades. Engineering gnomes. Spanner family. It's them. As for the strange-looking mechanical creation, Glenn didn't know what it was. After seeing the majestic appearance of the storm mech, it was difficult for him to agree that the mechanical body, which was only about half the size of a person, was also a type of mech. However, this was not difficult for Keyes. 8 radiation-like brackets with 8 propellers at the top. In the middle was a platform carrying weapons, motors, and fuel tanks. On the platform was a repeating crossbow driven by a motor. This was completely an 8-rotor drone. Looking at the about 50 crates that covered the entire basement, Keyes understood why the war machines left in Emerald Wood City were a secret weapon against Shredder. It was to use the drone swarm tactic to kill the robber. Chapter 701. After Emerald Wood City discovered the swarm drones, Red Pine, Black Willow, Blue Maple, and other cities successively discovered their inherited war machines. Without exception, they were all weapons of mass destruction, to deal with the corresponding calamity generals. Red Pine City, in response to his ignorance, unearthed a robotic male Sphinx war beast that could emit intimidating sound wave. Black Willow City, in response to Soul Search, unearthed an obsidian destroyer statue that could absorb soul energy. Blue Maple City, in response to his incarnation, unearthed an alchemy golem made of metal, wood, and glass tubes. In terms of value alone, the storm mech unearthed in Soft Maple City was undoubtedly the ceiling for the ancient Ramsey people to purchase arms from the siege goblins. However, considering the energy consumption, endurance, and maintenance costs, the war machines found in other cities seemed to be more advantageous. The swarm drones in Emerald Wood City were powered by a small light oil engine, and they could produce their own weapons and ammunition. Even if 50 drones took off at the same time, the fuel consumed was less than 1/10 of the fuel used to activate the storm mech once. It was only enough for the storm mech to operate for 3 hourglasses, but it was enough for the swarm drones to fly for an entire day. Red Pine City's robotic male Sphinx war beast used the captive's ignorance as an experiment. His sound wave attack could directly and effectively restrain the disturbing spiritual energy that the enemy constantly released to the surroundings. The infrasound attack contained in the 3 overlapping roars could even directly damage the Cyclops' cerebellum, causing it to lose the ability to coordinate its limbs. Black Willow City's obsidian destroyer statue had equally astonishing effect. Soul Search, who had been captured, was composed of soul energy, so he was not afraid of various interrogation methods. However, when he saw the obsidian destroyer statue, he immediately had a feeling similar to bristling. In order to test the effect of the weapon, Snade cancelled his amber seal and released Soul Search to face the obsidian destroyer. However, the soul energy released by the Calamity Generals was completely absorbed by the weapon, allowing it to complete its charging. Wings made of soul energy extended from the obsidian destroyer's back, and it flew into the sky like a griffin. It directly locked onto Soul Search and used pure soul energy to form a shock wave to continuously attack the Calamity Generals. If it weren't for the Demolica's timely intervention to restrain the bloodthirsty obsidian destroyer, the captured Calamity General would have turned from an experimental subject to a dead experimental subject. In comparison, the alchemy golem unearthed in Lan Fong City was indeed more troublesome to activate. Unlike ordinary golems, when the engineering goblins designed this golem, they considered that Tribulation might use spells such as Striking Golem to attack the soul of elements in the golem. Therefore, they took a different approach and replaced the intelligent control center that provided the golem with the brain of a humanoid creature. From the outside, this stooped construct was composed of glass tubes, metal, and wood. On top of it was a brain covered in tempered glass, floating in an unknown liquid with 2 eyes. However, in order to keep the brain active, the engineering goblins were lacking in the anti-corrosion aspect. After hundreds of years, more than half of the brain in the vat had rotted away, and many of its functions could no longer be carried out. In the end, it was the remnant of the miracle craftsman race, Shea, who removed the tempered glass cover and took out the brain. First, all the rotten parts were removed, and then the brain was repaired with a chip that came with its own battery. When the alchemy golem was successfully reactivated, due to the lack of a corresponding calamity general to test it, Sneyd could only personally confront it to test the specific functions of this rarely seen golem. As a result, he found that not only was the alchemy golem more flexible, its reaction speed was much faster than that of ordinary golems, but it also had a high resistance to other types of spells except for sound wave spells. This kind of golem also had a strange ability to absorb vitality. Through the two syringe-shaped magical items installed on its arms, the alchemy golem could absorb the vitality of the opponents it touched. Then, this vitality would turn into a kind of liquid and be stored in several containers in the golem's body. With this liquefied vitality, the alchemy golem could use a spellcasting method similar to that of the mages in the world of ashes, using the vitality of other creatures to provide energy support for spells, to cast many kinds of spells to fight with the enemy. To put it bluntly, when the alchemy golem faced an opponent with strong vitality, it would transform into a standard close combat mage, the kind that nurtured itself through battle and became more and more spirited. Fortunately, the steampunk Demolik was an undead creature, and Sneyd did not have any vitality for the alchemy golem to absorb. In the end, after the liquefied vitality originally stored in the alchemy golem's body was exhausted, the golem stopped attacking. "Good day, sir." The fat mayor of Soft Maple City arrived at the assembly hall early, and he repeated his greetings to all the guests who had arrived. However, at this time, his mood could be described as complicated. He was like a child who had lost his beloved toy but was compensated with a lollipop. Each city with a calamity general sealed inside had unearthed their own war machines one after another, and they were successfully activated one after another. As the first to discover this secret, he had left his storm mech in Soft Maple City. He still did not know that the storm mech had been driven by Neru to a newly established weapon research center of the scale of Perpetual Order. The only good news was that as the war machines were discovered one after another, he, like all the Ramsey people, had more confidence in their hearts. For a group of people who had experienced despair, being besieged by monsters and luckily escaping, knowing that they had weapons in their hands that could compete with those terrible monsters could more or less make them sleep better. "Good day, Mr. Mayor of Soft Maple City." As the host, Grim was the last to enter the assembly hall as usual. He greeted everyone, including the fat mayor, one by one. Then, the commander of the Five-City Alliance sat in his seat. "Thank you all for taking the time to come to Emeraldwood City," Grim said with assurance as he looked around. "Previously, I had formed a Five-City Alliance with Red Pine, Black Willow, Blue Maple, and Soft Maple. Today, I invited you all to come here to discuss how to continue expanding this alliance. Now, the awakening of the ancient slave masters has become a terrible fact. This is a huge test that all the Ramsey people will face together. In the previous battle, we have used the battle to test the strength of the monster army. They are very strong, very strong. The power of the Five-City Alliance alone is far from enough to fight against them, so I launched this general mobilization of the Ramsey people." Chapter 702. The early morning sun was like syrup, sprinkling the streets and alleys of Emeraldwood City. Everyone got up early to start the day's work. At the Green family master's order, the whole city entered a tense state of war readiness. Similar to the situation in Emeraldwood City, there were more than 10 cities on the Ramsey continent that had also entered a state of war readiness. They had all responded to Green's previous call and agreed to join the Alliance army to resist the King's monster army. Originally, the mayors of those cities had some hesitation, But after seeing how the Tribulation General had turned humans into monsters and how powerful those monsters were, they immediately agreed to join the Alliance's resistance army. If it were any other time, these people might have to consider which side was stronger, so that it would be easier to deal with them. But now, there was no need for that at all. Monsters and humans had never been able to coexist peacefully. Unlike Soft Maple City, Emerald Wood City was a mountain city, so it naturally had better defensive conditions. There was only one road from the north that led to the city gate, and the other three sides were either cliffs or mountain valleys. The food trade in this city was completely managed by the Green family. The food reserves in the city were enough for the whole city to consume for more than a year. There were more than 20 public reservoirs, and the big families also hid some mountain springs in their houses. With the experience of Soft Maple City, although Green had more confidence in Emerald Wood City, he still had a backup plan. He had specially opened up 3 huge public cisterns and installed a valve dam. Once the situation changed, as long as the people of Emerald Wood City picked up a floating tool that could float on the water, they would be able to float downstream to a secret camp more than 30 miles away. However, Keyes had some opinions about this. At present, the Ramseys have the upper hand, and they also have war machines in their hands to deal with the Tribulation General. If they are still passively defending, they are still competing with the King's army. There is no way to directly attack the enemy and solve the problem. In the young Blue Dragon's view, the Ramseys were cautious enough, but they lacked the willpower to fight. Instead of cutting flesh with a blunt knife and slowly consuming their morale, it was better to take advantage of the current advantage and directly flatten the enemy. Otherwise, even if dozens of cities were called an alliance, each city was not closely connected and could not cooperate to defend. If they were besieged by the monster army, the alliance would be meaningless, and the result would be that each city would fight for themselves. In order to make the alliance meaningful, the only way was to gather the armies of all the cities and form an army that truly belonged to the alliance. No matter how many routes the Emperor commanded the monster army to come, the Alliance army would take one route to meet the attack. There were only 10 Tribulation Generals and 1 wife under the Emperor. Foolish Opinion and A Soul Search had already fallen into the hands of Keyes. His incarnation had yet to show itself, but he reckoned that the Emperor had already absorbed all of his life force. The dog tamer had now become a leviathan through and through. From the looks of it, a quarter of the enemy monster leaders were no longer effective. Moreover, apart from the dog tamer, only Shurgu was still serving the Emperor. The ancient slave master was busy reviving the other generals. However, with Green's notice, the other cities that still had their seals intact now sent more people to keep an eye on those seals. It was almost impossible for the Emperor to unknowingly obtain the coffins of his old subordinates. Therefore, if Keyes were to command this battle himself, he would have gathered an army and fought a decisive battle with the Emperor before he fully recovered. It would be best if he could eliminate this great enemy that threatened all the Ramsey people in one fell swoop. However, even if he and the scale of perpetual order had shown their strength, the rulers of the Ramsey city would not allow such a third party to be their leader. In fact, the reason why Green could become the commander-in-chief of the Alliance army was because he had used his identity as the mayor of Emerald City to exchange benefits with the other cities of the Alliance. That was how he gained the recognition of those people. Keyes obviously did not have such conditions. However, this wasn't too bad for him. After all, in his original plan, he had hoped that the Emperor could bring enough pressure to the entire Ramsey Plain, and indirectly bring some sense of urgency to Dwarf Island, which would eventually influence the God of Virtual Games, Stim. However, just as he thought that Ramsey's counterattack would start in a defense counterattack mode, Dwarf Island made the decision to fight against the Emperor before the Ramsey people did. The representatives of 3 large chambers of commerce arrived in Emerald City on the same day. They brought with them about 6,000 elite caravan guards, and enough supplies to last them for 2 months. They were the representatives of several large families of Dwarf Island among the Ramsey people. These people brought the wishes of the master craftsman. Dwarf Island will participate in the fight against the Emperor. Next, even more mechanized legions will be sent directly into the battle against the monster army. Currently, any city that fights against the monster army will receive additional gem coins from Dwarf Island this year. The many conditions that Dwarf Island offered were all to encourage the Ramsey people to fight against the Emperor. Moreover, unlike the many indirect measures that had affected the Ramsey Plain in the past, Dwarf Island seemed to be serious this time. They were even going to directly send an army to participate in the battle. After all, this was the first time that Dwarf Island had sent a real army to interfere in the affairs of the Ramsey Plain after the ancient war. In addition, the representatives of the Chambers of Commerce also brought a suggestion from Dwarf Island: hand over all the excavated war machines to Dwarf Island for research. They promised that they would be able to recover the technology and build more war machines to fight against the Emperor. As compensation, Dwarf Island would return at least twice the amount of war machines to the various city-states. Without a doubt, Grimm first thanked Dwarf Island for their kindness on behalf of all the city mayors. Then, he said that the war machines could not be handed over to Dwarf Island for research because the battle against the Emperor's monster army was imminent. They had to rely on these weapons to deal with the Emperor's monster army. Of course, he did not say anything definite. Grimm said that if Dwarf Island could immediately send enough troops to join the battle, and at the same time prove that they could effectively kill the Emperor's monster army, then they would be willing to lend out the war machines. However, Grimm knew that this was impossible. Chapter 703. Where did the Scales of Eternal Order come from? After the meeting with Green of Emerald Wood City, the representatives of several chambers of commerce hurried back to the inn. The president of the Todd Chamber of Commerce invited the two of them to his room and asked them questions. "I heard it's a newly established chamber of commerce." The president, who was familiar with him, thought for a moment and replied, "But so far, our commercial spies haven't figured out what their chamber of commerce is doing." When it came to commercial spies, Todd and the other president were both well aware that this old man had always liked to use spies. When the two chambers of commerce launched a new product, the product description might be placed on the other party's desk before they knew about it. However, with such a powerful commercial intelligence system, they couldn't even find out what a newly established small chamber of commerce was doing. This was enough to attract their attention, because there were only two possibilities for such a result. First, the Scales of Eternal Order was really a newbie, or it could be said that they were just a newly established team, so the commercial spies did not send back any useful information. Second, the Chamber of Commerce had a foundation beyond their imagination, and they had been operating a trade that ordinary people had no way of knowing. In view of the situation in the meeting room today, the presidents of the three chambers of commerce could only speak to Mayor Green, while the president of the Scales of Eternal Order had a seat next to Green. They were more inclined to the second possibility. All in all, we have completed half of our mission. The City-State Alliance has also made it clear that they want to fight against the Emperor's monster army. At this point, President Todd paused for a moment. As for the war machines that Dwarf Island wants from the other city-states, based on the current situation, the other city-states should have the same attitude as Green. They definitely won't give it to them. This is understandable. After all, 2 birds in the bush are better than 1 bird in the hand. It's best to have the weapon in your hand. The other 2 presidents also agreed with Todd's view. As merchants, even with the support of Dwarf Island behind them and major trade with various city-states, they still couldn't change the ruler's mind on certain issues. Fortunately, the current situation was still quite good. Dwarf Island didn't give them a strict order, so they could still complete half of their mission. As they chatted, because they were still merchants, their topic quickly shifted to various businesses. Dealing with emperors was just their side business. This time, when they came to Jadewood City, these three chambers of commerce did not forget to do some business. The three presidents, as envoys, lived in the mountain city's posthouse. However, most of the guards were still stationed at the foot of the mountain. As for the 6,000 caravan guards, after setting up their own camp, they immediately rushed to build a trading market. The three caravans not only brought supplies for the soldiers, but also a lot of goods that were in high demand. At the moment when the monster army was pressing on the border and everyone was in a state of panic, the war toys they brought from Dwarf Island were not lacking in demand at all. Put the best bear trap behind the door, and those monsters won't be able to enter your house. Holy water blessed by the dwarf god. Use it to wash your face every morning and night. It can dispel evil. Quick escape shoes. Even if you are surrounded by monsters, you can escape immediately. In the middle of a broad-leaved forest, the shouts of selling goods rose and fell. The salesmen from the three chambers of commerce were all trying their best to promote their own good. The target of their shouts were the residents from Jadewood City, as well as the refugees from Soft Maple City who had recently settled down here. Of course, they were only a part of those who had some money. Old Bobby walked in the market. He originally just wanted to buy some grains that could be used to brew wine for his newly opened North Wind Tavern, but now he had a few more protective items in his hands. After experiencing the monster siege and the overnight retreat from Soft Maple City, the tavern owner was no longer optimistic. In order to protect his new business, he would rather spend more money. There were many people who had the same idea as him. Many of the rich people in Soft Maple City were now spending a lot of money in the market to buy some useless things to make themselves feel at ease. This thing is actually a bit useful. Unlike before in Avernus, the old hags sold fake goods. Since they had nothing to do, Nalu and Brew used the magic items given by Snade to conceal themselves and wandered around the camp. Nalu bought a pair of quick escape shoes. After disassembling it, he said to his brother, "There are 2 springs in the insoles, and it seems that they are all enchanted with magic. As long as you pull the latch, the soles of the shoes can eject ordinary people at least 7 or 8 meters away. At the very least, the things sold here are not false advertising." Brew bought a cup of sparkling drink. He said that it was made by grinding wheat blessed by the dwarf god into flour, making bread, and then fermenting it. The ogre gourmet sipped the drink and agreed with his brother's opinion. "This drink is indeed very satisfying," as they said. In the huge forest market, the 2 ogre brothers disguised as ordinary people walked and looked around. From time to time, they bought some trinkets. They looked like 2 normal tourists. Just as they finished walking around and were about to leave the market and return to Emeraldwood City, Brew suddenly had a feeling. He opened the food box on his back. Even though he was disguised as an ordinary person, he did not give up the habit of carrying this treasure with him. He took out a small jar from the box, dipped his finger in the mustard paste, and quickly wiped it on the tip of his tongue. An extremely penetrating sense of stimulation quickly spread to his 5 senses. Under his deliberate guidance, this particularly penetrating sense of stimulation quickly rushed to his eyes. Brew's eyes were moist, but he did not shed tears. This was because these tears, under the influence of magic power, formed a set of lenses, which provided a sense equivalent to the eagle eye spell. Brew raised his head and looked up at the sky. "It seems that something is falling from the sky, like a needle." No, like a column falling to the center of Emeraldwood City. The ogre gourmet frowned. He was familiar with this scene. Since the birth of the Leviathan, Keys had used the staff strike tactic more than once. However, if they attacked Emeraldwood City now, they did not seem to have any benefits at all. Wait. Brew suddenly thought of something. He raised his head again and narrowed his eyes. As the column fell, it was getting closer to the ground. Brew finally saw what the small dot at the top of the column was. "Sure goo. He's copying our tactic." Chapter 704. For a businessman, the most painful thing was not to make money, but to make money but not being able to spend it. The three presidents of the Chamber of Commerce, who had just been talking about business, received their lunchboxes in the blink of an eye. And they died miserably. The magic stone pillar that fell vertically from a height of tens of thousands of feet happened to hit the post house of Emerald Wood City, and the nearby 2 or 3 whole blocks were turned upside down. Even taking into account the reason for its liftoff, when the Emperor made this weapon, the raw material used was relatively light, so light that it could float on the water. But when the gravitational potential energy was converted into kinetic energy, this magic stone pillar was still a city-destroying level weapon. The one who controlled this stone pillar was Shirgu, a subordinate of the Emperor. Because of the failure to besiege Soft Maple City, the dog trainer was whipped by his master. Shirgu rose to the top and replaced the general to conquer and destroy Emerald Wood City. Although Shirgu really did not understand conquest and destruction, which was not the same thing as hunting, the Emperor believed that killing and arson would not be difficult for him. "This is my hunting ground, and all of you are my prey." Shirgu, who had caused a shocking explosion, stood at the top of the magic stone pillar and announced loudly. With his words, the surface of the magic stone pillar, which had not collapsed even when it fell from a high altitude under the effect of the Emperor's magical spell, instantly cracked. Fragments of the stone began to peel off, and hot lava flowed out of the stone pillar. When the lava dripped to the ground, it immediately turned into a half-humanoid monster with a spiked shell. Their bodies exuded high heat, and as soon as they took shape, they waved their lobster-like chelicerae and began to charge around. These monsters were originally a kind of elemental creature called earthworm. They were violent creatures composed of fire and slag. They lived in the vast area filled with ashes and lava at the border between the fire elemental plane and the earth elemental plane. There, they fed on minerals and used their furnace-like bodies to smelt them into armor that gave them strong natural defense. Although as an otherworldly creature, the earthworm did not need to eat to survive, a hungry earthworm would usually be much weaker than its healthy counterpart. The Emperor summoned this elemental creature to the hatchery, then fed it with the metal residue obtained from the Soft Maple City. Finally, he used evil magic to twist it into a monster that did not belong to the natural world, the Earth Boa. After creating the magic stone pillar, the Emperor first stuffed all the earth puppets he had created in advance into it, then cast a spell to raise the stone pillar tens of thousands of feet above the ground, and finally moved the stone pillar to the sky above Emerald Wood City. The reason why Shirgu was arranged to stand on the stone pillar was to ensure that the stone pillar could fall vertically and reduce the resistance to achieve a higher speed. Secondly, it was to let Tribulation command these earth puppets. Set this city ablaze and force out every prey hiding in the buildings. Let me enjoy the pleasure of hunting to my heart's content. Shirgu ordered all the earth puppets. The monsters all responded with a sound similar to crabs spitting bubbles, and then did their best to rush to every building they could see. For the earth puppets, it was impossible to walk through the door in this life. The high temperature released from their bodies allowed them to instantly turn the walls made of logs into charcoal, so that they could break through the walls and enter. If they encountered a wall made of hard rocks, the earth puppets would use their innate ability to merge with the rocks and move forward. Faced with these uninvited guests, the citizens of Emerald Wood City began to spontaneously resist. They waved kitchen knives, benches, and wooden sticks, trying to drive these monsters out of their homes. However, those things either could not break the hard shell of the earth puppets, or were ignited by the lava ejected from their bodies, drowned, and melted away without a trace. As a last resort, more and more citizens ran to the street. Without exception, these people all became the prey of Tribulation's bone bow and were tragically slaughtered by Shirgu. In a short period of time, Emerald Wood City, which had just recovered from the shocking explosion, instantly fell into 2 more blocks. Many of the citizens who fled to the streets were killed by arrows and began to mutate into semi-mature monsters. Howl, despair, then embrace death in pain. Shirgu, like a neurotic, announced loudly while flying in the air. On the path he passed by, the chilling flowers of blood bloomed one after another. At this moment, from afar to near, bursts of buzzing suddenly sounded. Like an octopus, drones took off one after another from the Green family's mansion, forming a swarm formation and rapidly approaching Tribulation. New tricks. Shirgu looked at the drones flying towards him and said disdainfully. He pulled out a bone arrow from the dendrobium between his legs, lightly knocked the bowstring, and shot at the drone closest to him. The bone arrow tore through the air, making a hissing sound like a wild snake spitting out its tongue. However, the drone did not dodge. Instead, it shot a crossbow arrow at it, and with a ding sound, the bone arrow was shot out of the air. Huh! Shirgu was slightly startled. Immediately afterward, the group of drones swarmed forward like wasps that had their nest blown up, surrounding Robber tightly. Bang! 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 The rain of arrows continued to rain on Shirgu as if they wanted to annihilate him. With no way to avoid it, Tribulation could only use advanced teleportation to free himself from the encirclement. This was the first time he had experienced something like this. One had to know that Shirgu was originally a hunted corpse by the Emperor, a kind of flying Kwai Kailang. Kwai Kailang was a spirit creature with the most astonishing movement speed, transformed into Tribulation. This had always been a skill he was proud of. Bone arrow clone technique. After teleporting out of the encirclement, Shirgu immediately drew his bow and shot out bone arrows like a cannon. In the process of flying, these arrows split into 2, 2 into 4, 4 into 8, forming a real downpour of rain. The drone swarm could not dodge in time. One after another, the important mechanical parts of the drones were hit by bone arrows, and then they fell from the air to the ground like dumplings. That's it, Shirgu said with a proud grin. However, he only said half a sentence and could not say the second half. It turned out that after the drones fell, there was a flash of yellow light on the fuselage immediately. That was the construct repair, added by the engineering goblins on the core component. Then, they flew back into the sky. What the hell? Tribulation General cursed. Faced with the swarm of drones again, he could only choose to retreat quickly and then think about other things. After all, he was good at speed and archery, not high HP like the dog tamer. The power that these drones had just unleashed had revealed the ability to kill him completely. Chapter 705. Damn it, just a little bit more, Grim said fiercely. With a fin-like signal transmitter on his head, and his eyes firmly locked on Shirgu, the mayor of Emeraldwood City kept urging his chariot to run faster. For hundreds of years, Emeraldwood City had never suffered such a disaster as today. Most of the time, the hill giants only made a small fuss outside the city. At most, they just threw 2 stones and smashed a few piles of rubble from the city walls. But today, the terrible magic stone pillar fell from the sky, not only directly overturned 2 blocks, but also released a large number of earthworms to wreak havoc in the city. The number of casualties in the entire city was so high that it was difficult to calculate. The most optimistic estimate was that in half an hourglass, more than 3,000 lives were lost. As long as the Green family has a single man left, no one will be able to walk out of this city unscathed after harming it. Mayor Green's eyes were bloodshot, and his teeth creaked as he gritted them. The reason why he used the drone swarm to deal with Shirgu was that he wanted to keep this calamity here to comfort the souls of the people who died in Emeraldwood City. A total of 38 drones, all connected to Grimm's brainwaves through signal transmitters. With a thought, these war machines designed by the engineering goblins would move and adjust their formation. Whether attacking, defending, or dodging, Each drone was like a hornet in a swarm, naturally locking on to Shirgu and not letting him go. To be honest, to send 38 signals at the same time, even with the fin-shaped signal transmitter as an aid, was not an easy burden for the user. Gradually, Grim felt his temples begin to swell and throb. Faster, don't lose track of Shirgu, we must end this quickly. Feeling his spirit weakening, he could not help but loudly order the black armored knight who was driving the chariot. As loyal subordinates cultivated by the family, the black armored knight would firmly obey the orders of the Grim family head of each generation. Even if the Grim family head ordered them to die in vain, these people would gladly endure it without any hesitation. Driving the two-wheeled chariot pulled by two strong horses, the black armored knight rampaged on the road. Whether it was the gargoyles, the stalls on the street, or the fleeing pedestrians, he would not avoid any of them. Around the chariot, there were over 100 private soldiers of the Green Clan in black armor. They were all elites from the garrison of Emerald Wood City. These people were all riding on two horses. When they saw pedestrians, they would chase them away. When they encountered scurrying earth boas, they would pull out the weapons in their hands and charge forward without hesitation. In fact, in addition to the Black Armor Private Army and Emerald Wood City's guards, many civilians of Emerald Wood City also began to fight against the monsters that dared to destroy their homes. Compared to Soft Maple City, this city built on a high mountain seemed to have more of a mountain temperament, stubborn, tough, and daring to fight to the death with the enemy. The civilians of Emerald Wood City, or rather, the mountain people, after being forced into a corner by the Earth Stooges, they dared to raise their weapons and launch a deadly counterattack against these heat-emitting monsters covered in 1-2 feet long spikes. In the beginning, ordinary civilians were indeed no match for the Earth monsters. No matter what kind of weapon, when it hit the hard shell of these monsters, it would always be ignited or directly broken. When the Earth Stooges hit ordinary people, it was really one punch, one child. They did not encounter an opponent. However, as the battle continued, some people finally discovered that these monsters were actually somewhat afraid of water. When they encountered a single Earth Stooge, as long as water was splashed, they would be afraid and take the initiative to retreat. There were even people who used cold well water or ice from the ice cellar to hit the Earth Stooges. The Earth Stooges would explode on the spot with a bang, and it would take a long time for them to get up again. Gradually, the Earth Stooges that suddenly entered various buildings began to be driven out of their homes. More and more people carried buckets of water, and in their hands were hardwood door bolts that were as thick as bowls, chasing after these monsters. Shirgu, who was flying in the air, was now in a terrible fix. As the Earth Stooges controller appointed by the Emperor, he could somehow learn about the monster's every move, but at this time, he could not concentrate on giving new orders to those monsters. Because the drone swarm was firmly behind him, as long as this tribulation general paused for a moment, those drones would swarm up, try to surround him again, and then fire a dense rain of arrows at him. "Ghosts don't go away," Shirgu muttered in exasperation. Although he did not know that as long as he persisted for another hourglass, even if Green could still command, the fuel of those drones would be exhausted. But this tribulation general finally chose to listen to his inner thoughts. "I can't fight with these mechanical creations. The Emperor is experimenting with modulated beasts that can fight against these war weapons. Instead of fighting to the death with them now, it's better to wait for the next time to bring the modulated beasts to deal with these guys. I'm just a hunter, it's not worthwhile to fight to the death like that dog trainer. The Emperor knows my choice, and I think he won't blame me too much." After he convinced himself, Shirgu no longer hesitated. This tribulation general decisively used advanced teleportation and once again widened the distance between him and the drone swarm. Then, he fled out of Emerald Wood City without looking back. As long as he could get into the dense forest. As an excellent hunter, with the complex terrain there, he was confident that he could get rid of any opponent who wanted to track him. Unfortunately, someone had the same idea as him. Since you're here, near the city gate, Keyes held a double-barreled short-barreled gun and looked at Shirgu, who was fleeing in the direction of the dense forest. His figure flickered and appeared in front of the Tribulation General. Don't go. Because he had to face an opponent as swift as the wind, he had just upgraded the Whaler and cancelled the original trigger mode. He put a metal coil around it and turned it into an electromagnetic short-barreled gun. With a thought, a blazing electric current gushed out from Keyes's palm and instantly activated the electromagnetic short-barreled bullets inside the barrel. 2 round warheads shot out and caught the shocked Tribulation General off guard. Because it was a close-range shooting, Keyes chose a more handsome, efficient execution gun. The bullet, wrapped in powerful kinetic energy, directly shattered Shirgu's head. Plop, the headless corpse fell straight to the ground, splashing dust on the ground. This Tribulation General cooperated, and stayed in the walls of Emerald Wood City. Chapter 706. Shirgu's body was properly collected. Originally, Green intended to give him the crow punishment, put his body inside the iron fence, hang it on the top of the flagpole, and wait for the crows to peck at it until there was nothing left. However, because he later considered that General Tribulation was a monster created by the Emperor, maybe his flesh and blood would also induce the mutation of ordinary creatures, Mayor Green finally gave up the idea. He ordered people to bring Shirgu back, soak the body in tung oil, and then set it on fire. Finally, the monster leader completely turned into a pile of embers. Based on what he did to Emerald Wood City, it would be too easy for this guy to burn his bones and scatter his ashes. Green gnashed his teeth and said, after dealing with the remains of General Tribulation, the mayor of Emerald Wood City immediately began to deal with the earthworms. Even though General Tribulation's death had been confirmed, those monsters were still running around the city, constantly causing destruction. Of course, this destruction was mainly to the buildings. Because people had discovered the weakness of the earthworms, as long as they prepared a bucket of cold water in advance at home, the lives of people and animals would no longer be taken by the monsters. In the past hour, the alchemy workshops of Emerald Wood City were all operating at full capacity, temporarily configuring a lot of refrigeration solvents. Using this solvent, the alchemists condensed the clear water into broken ice and distributed it to the city's garrison forces. The regular army of Emerald Wood City was now fighting in a phalanx as the basic combat unit. More than 50 people formed a group, and each group carried buckets and nozzles filled with crushed ice. Block by block, they searched the entire city for the earth centipede. As long as they saw an earthworm, they would swarm it and spray it with ice water to limit its ability to move. Then, the soldiers holding special long-handled warhammers would go out and completely smash the earthworms with cracked shells. If the regular army was responsible for pressing those monsters to death one by one, then the ordinary civilians of Emerald Wood City mostly shouldered the mission of expelling the earthworms. Because of the constant strangulation of the regular army, most of the earthworms began to learn to avoid the main streets, hiding in the corners of the city. Therefore, ordinary civilians could only rely on splashing water to expel them from their homes. When they ran to the street, they would naturally be found by the regular army, and then be besieged and killed. The strange green flame formed a light curtain. The Emperor and the dog trainer, who had recovered from the whipping, stood in front of the screen and watched the scene inside. They saw Shirgu, who was like a divine soldier descending from the sky, manipulating a magic stone pillar to pierce into the heart of the Alliance army, poking a big hole in Greenwood City, and then began to kill in all directions. However, when the drone swarm appeared, the situation on Shirgu's side suddenly reversed. This General Tribulation was forced to flee by the drone cluster. In the end, he had to completely give up commanding the Earth Boar and flee. What surprised them even more was that Shirgu, who was known for his speed, didn't even manage to escape Jadewood City before he was stopped and shot in the head. The emperor did not express any opinion on the death of the general. He was neither angry nor vexed. He just reached out his finger and fiddled with the light screen, and the scene changed to some other place. Looking at the Earth stooges that were being slaughtered, the emperor revealed a chilling smile. He lowered his head to look at the hound trainer and asked, "Do you understand?" "My lord, I don't understand," the hound trainer answered honestly. He really didn't understand why the emperor was particularly interested in the Earth stooges. Could it be that in his eyes, Shirgu was not even comparable to a group of mass-produced monsters? The emperor snorted, and a plume of black smoke came out of his nostrils. His big mouth full of fangs began to open and close. A large number of incantations that ordinary people could not understand at all came out of his mouth one after another. As he chanted, the Earth stooges in the green light curtain in front of him all looked like they had drunk fake wine, and their steps became shaky. It didn't take long for all the Earth stooges to lie on the ground. The spiked shell wrapped around these monsters instantly shattered, and many hard-shelled insects about a foot long with a cone-shaped spike on their heads drilled out of the bodies of the Earth stooges. They didn't make any unnecessary movements. As soon as they appeared, they raised their bodies and slammed the cone-shaped spike on their heads into the ground. Then they quickly dug into the ground, leaving behind only a high-temperature, bowl-sized tunnel. Water is the source of life. After using his evil magic, the emperor grinned. At least, for those pitiful creatures that have not yet received my rebirth, it is indeed so. If they don't drink water, they will die. They think they found the weakness of the Earth stooges, which is that they are afraid of water. But they don't know that the Earth stooges only hate water and not fear it. The hound trainer was puzzled. Seeing the expression of his trusted subordinate, the emperor couldn't help but laugh. If they are forced into a corner, the Earth stooges can make that place no longer have any water. Things that start with water will always end with blood. Listening to the continuous reports of the clearing of monsters in each block, Green couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. He believed that Emerald Wood City had finally survived today's disaster. The most important thing now is to count the losses of Emerald Wood City, and then, while he was issuing orders to the summoned officials, he stopped abruptly halfway because the door of the meeting room was directly broken by a black-armored knight. "Sir, there is a situation." The black-armored knight energetically ran in. Seeing Green, he didn't have time to salute and loudly reported, "Those monsters all turned into insects, and those insects all drilled into the ground. Also, we received a lot of reports that after those insects drilled into the ground, the springs in Emerald Wood City no longer have water coming out." "What?" Green's eyes widened. As the ruler of the city, he knew how precious water was. The reason why Emerald Wood City was able to stand among the towering mountains and precipitous ridges was because there were several hundred springs in the city that were connected to the underground. They could completely meet the daily drinking water needs of the entire city, and there was no need to draw water from the river at the foot of the mountain. But now, those Earth stooges that had turned into insects drilled directly into the ground. They used their bodies to release high heat, melting rocks and soil, blocking almost every spring that could produce water, cutting off the lifeline of Emerald Wood City. "Quickly send people to check those reservoirs." Green's mind turned, immediately thinking of something, his voice raised an octave. "Make sure there is no one there to destroy. That is the last public water source of Emerald Wood City." Chapter 707. If there was a possibility of things going bad, no matter how small the possibility was, it would always happen. The assistant sent by Glenn to inspect the public reservoir brought back an extremely terrible news. Emerald Wood City's dams and graded public reservoirs were almost completely emptied. The worms that crawled out of the monster's body drilled a big hole in each level of the dam. The water level of each level of the public reservoir did not reach the hole. Glenn's assistant personally tested the water. In fact, the water was only about a palm's worth. Perhaps it was only enough to satisfy the drinking water needs of the entire Emerald Wood City. If it was a rich family, perhaps there was still lager in their own wine cellar to quench their thirst. But if the water in an ordinary civilian's house was cut off, even cooking would be a problem. All the lager in the wine merchants and taverns will be listed as emergency supplies. The Green family will buy it back at cost price. After learning how serious the water shortage in the city was, Green immediately issued an administrative order. In addition, mobilize all the citizens who were not affected by the disaster to go to the Cold Howl River at the foot of the mountain to get water. Before sunset today, every household must have 2 days' worth of drinking water in their house. Immediately after, he summoned all the construction workers in the city and told them to immediately bring their tools and set out for the public reservoir. For them, Green only had one request. That was, they must fill in the holes as quickly as possible so that the reservoir could be used. After a great battle, and then quickly formulated and issued a series of government orders, Green's spirit was exhausted to the extreme. But even so, he still braced himself and forced himself to meet with Keyes, who came to discuss matters with him. We'd better make a long story short. Staring with red eyes, the mayor of Emerald Wood City spoke with exhaustion. If it's not too important, then please allow me to rest for a moment. After 2 hourglasses you can come find me again. Keyes shrugged his shoulders. He knew that Green's words were true. You can drink this first. As he spoke, he pulled out a clay pot from his sleeve. It was filled with the energy potion concocted by the ogre witch doctor. Trust me, you only need to drink a small spoonful, and you'll be able to hold on for at least an hourglass. This time should be enough. Generally speaking, as the mayor, Green simply would not drink any medicine other than the one provided by the family alchemist. However, he really couldn't hold on any longer. Therefore, after a black-armored knight used poison detection to appraise the energy potion and confirmed that it did not contain any poison, he opened the clay pot and drank a mouthful of the potion. So those 2 black knights are also saint samurai. Keyes's eyes revealed a look of understanding. He now had a higher opinion of the Green clan's status in Greenwood City. After all, not just anyone could make the paladins under Tom, the god of loyalty and courage, willingly pledge their loyalty. What happened to Emerald City is definitely not an isolated case, Keyes said, giving Grimm a surprise. According to the information just obtained by the Scales of Eternal Order, more than 12 cities in the Ramsey Plain were attacked by the army of monsters at the same time, just like Emerald City. In particular, the 4 core cities of the Alliance army have all been hit hard. Because of the fear of the Emperor's creation of synthetic creatures, he believed that the Emperor had created a brand new type of illusionary serpent. The master craftsman, the great engineer Shea, designed a special instrument to detect the special biological waves emitted from those monsters. When the Shredder attacked Emerald City, 12 similar signals appeared on Shea's instrument. He immediately informed Keyes of this news. The young Blue Dragon had the Demolic perform divination on him and came to a similar conclusion. Emerald City, Red Pine City, Black Willow City, and Blue Maple City were all attacked by the magic stone pillars. This time, the Emperor may have sent more than one Calamity warrior. He seems to have reunited his incarnation and the Panther Man. I think he may have used some kind of evil magic to remotely summon the soul of the Calamity warrior. The foolish man who was imprisoned by me almost died suddenly. My magic consultant used a lot of counterspells and spent a lot of effort to completely imprison the soul of the monster in his own body. Hearing Keyes' words, Grimm's face immediately changed. He hurriedly summoned the black armored knights and whispered a few words into their ears. Obviously, the mayor of Emerald City had some special methods that allowed him to quickly contact several of his allies. He quickly received replies from several other mayors. The results were the same as what Keyes had said. The situation was indeed not optimistic. I have confirmed. Glenn said with difficulty. You are right. At least the first few cities of the Alliance of 4 cities have all been attacked by air attack. They have also encountered different calamity warriors. The one Red Pine City encountered should be the Panther Man. The other party could freely switch between the 2 forms of a human and a Black Panther, and could escape into the shadows. The mechanical Sphinx beast had the opportunity to be dismantled into parts before it was finally defeated. The one Black Willow City encountered was a fat human who could change his figure at will. It was suspected to be an incarnation. He could absorb the life force of ordinary people to heal his injuries. The mayor of Black Willow City activated the Obsidian Destroyer, but was defeated by the other party's super-large wyvern. Before the Obsidian Destroyer was destroyed, the soul energy curse that erupted seemed to have injured the other party. The incarnation withdrew from Black Willow City because of the injury. Lawn Maple City was attacked by another calamity warrior. This calamity warrior seemed to be the god of night from ancient legends. He should be a monster that was recently resurrected by the emperor. This fellow was suspected to be a phantom devil. If there were no spellcasters guarding them or taking the calming medicine prepared by alchemists, everyone would encounter a series of nightmares as long as they slept. Moreover, the injuries suffered in the nightmares would also be reflected on the sleeper's body. At present, the alchemy golem did not undertake any combat task. It only absorbed a large amount of calming medicine and went from house to house to give injections and infusions. The mayor of Lawn Maple City also asked us for help. He wants a batch of raw materials for the calming medicine. Through his own channels, Mayor Grimm obtained more detailed information. Among them, there was a lot of content that even Keyes heard for the first time. He had expected that the Emperor's attack would definitely avoid the main force and strike at the weak point. He definitely would not release the Calamity Warriors to fight to the death with the newly excavated war machines in the place where they were originally sealed. However, Keyes did not expect that this wave of attack would come so fiercely and cover such a wide area. Didn't the Emperor just wake up? Logically speaking, shouldn't he be plotting slowly and slowly accumulating power? Why would he suddenly exert so much pressure on the Alliance army? Isn't he afraid that all the Ramsey people will really band together? Chapter 708. After a period of rest, Green regained his energy. He immediately called for a cross-city meeting within the Alliance. The priests of the gods summoned divine spells. The mayors of each alliance did not need to gather together. They only needed to stand in front of a square container filled with holy water to communicate with the rulers of other cities for up to 2 hourglasses. Time was precious, so Green made a long story short. The Emperor's recent series of attacks is to exhaust us and make us busy dealing with the crisis in our respective cities. Thus, we can't form an alliance to fight against him. This ancient Ramsey slave master has a war potential that we can't compare to. According to reliable sources, he has already invaded and plundered every inch of land within 100 miles from the magic nest at the protruding point of Maple City. A large number of farmers living in the countryside were captured and twisted into various monsters, or used as materials for his evil magic. Many times, if he is allowed to develop, he will soon gather an unstoppable army of monsters. As he spoke, the Supreme Commander of the Alliance Army signaled to Pastor Tom beside him. The clergyman immediately put a special parchment into the container and floated on the surface of the clear holy water. With the help of the pastor's communication spell, the contents recorded on the parchment were projected in front of the mayors at the meeting. It recorded the migration of people in various major transportation hubs collected from Emerald Wood City. A large number of refugees have begun to flee to the south, Green explained to the crowd. Following that, not only is there a surge of pressure to settle people, but at the same time, the restless bandit groups have also taken advantage of this opportunity to grow rapidly. According to the information sent by the former rebel leader Mr. Rake, who has reached a consensus with the alliance and decided to join the alliance. Even some bandit groups have grown so strong that they dare to attack the villages under their jurisdiction and rob people, livestock, and property. Although I'm not sure whether these bandit groups have anything to do with the Emperor, their vigorous development during this period has indeed affected the alliance's overall situation of resisting the Emperor's power and made Ramsey more chaotic. As for these bandits who refuse to behave and are united against a common enemy, whether it is for the sake of morality or for the sake of the overall situation of the war, we cannot tolerate them. These unstable factors must be eliminated as soon as possible. In fact, even if Green did not provide this proof, the mayors who attended the meeting had already received the news of the influx of refugees from their own channels. They also had some understanding of the situation of the bandits swarming. Currently, the furthest human city-states that had joined the Ramsey Alliance was only about 800 kilometers away from Emerald Wood City. In the span of a dozen days, many wealthy merchant families had already migrated there. If they could stop, the mayors might even think that this was an opportunity to increase the city's tax revenue. However, as they brought the news of the Emperor Monster Army, the wealthy families in the cities began to pack up and prepare to migrate to the more remote areas in the south. Wherever the monster army passes, the tragedy is simply indescribable. If you fall into the hands of the monsters, even death is an extravagant hope. The Emperor will use evil magic to distort humans into monsters. All kinds of rumors were everywhere. In addition, the Emperor had launched an air raid on 12 city-states yesterday, and 4 of them had been attacked by the raiders. More than 500,000 people had witnessed the scene of the monster army wreaking havoc, and nearly 50,000 civilians had died. The fear of the Emperor had begun to spread rapidly throughout the Ramsey Alliance. It was unstoppable and unavoidable. Others can escape, but everyone, Green said solemnly, we are the backbone of our respective cities. Our family's glory is all entrusted to the cities under our feet. Therefore we cannot escape. The only way is to fight the Emperor and put that abominable ancient slave master back into his grave. The words of the commander-in-chief of the Alliance Army had indeed struck the hearts of every mayor present. Just as Green had said, most of them were bound together with their cities for good or ill. Therefore, in this revenge war between the Emperor and all the Ramseys, if they did not want to lose everything, then they could only fight to the end. Only by winning could they keep everything they had. But if they failed, they would be swept away into the pile of history, or even worse than that, they would become unremembered. For people who had experienced the taste of power, being completely forgotten by the world was actually a fate more terrible than death. Therefore, Green had only just started, and all the mayors began to respond positively. We can't passively take a beating, the commander-in-chief of the Alliance Army concluded. The best defense has always been offense, especially in the face of an enemy who can continuously transform the Ramseys into monsters. We must not give him enough time to transform. Yesterday, the Emperor launched an air raid on 12 cities at the same time, and sent a total of more than 10,000 monsters. These monsters are different from the lowest-level monsters. Presumably they will have a lower transformation efficiency. According to the estimation of our consultant, Mr. Keyes, in order to transform so many monsters, the Emperor has consumed at least 80,000 people he has captured. This was almost all the villagers he could find around the protrusion. In other words, the Emperor should be busy plundering more people. He is now hoarding the next wave of monster army. Therefore, we must seize this opportunity to burn the walls and clear the wilderness. We must not leave him any refugees who can be transformed into monsters. At the same time, we must resolutely eliminate the bandit groups suspected of aiding the Emperor's plan. To ensure that the refugees can smoothly evacuate to safer places, they will be our backup force. They can't become nutrients for the bandit groups. There was no doubt that Green was a very practical commander. He was very clear that after the encounter with the monster army, if he proposed to organize an army to counterattack the Emperor's nest, some mayors might be afraid to restrain him out of fear. Therefore, he did not propose such a plan. Instead, he aimed at the bandit groups that were wantonly operating. On the one hand, the continuous growth of these bandit groups could indeed cause chaos in the Ramsey world, so they should be eradicated as soon as possible to prevent future troubles. On the other hand, the strength of the armies of the Alliance army was currently mixed. Finding a soft persimmon to pinch would be a good way to break in the patchwork army and make some preparations for future tough battles. Chapter 709. They first heard the sound of hooves, then the faint metallic sound of armor clashing against each other. The sound was getting clearer and clearer. The drifting dust blurred the distance until the flag-bearer took the lead and rushed out of the messy gray curtain. There was an iron spider painted in red and white at the top of the flagpole, and a black flag with a skull design hung coldly below it. Seeing the crowd on the other side of the stream, the flag-bearer immediately reined in his horse. A moment later, all the bandits of the Spider Bandits appeared beside the flag-bearer, fully armed. The leader was a muscular man who was 6 feet tall. His upper body was naked, and he was as muscular as a wrestler. His body was covered in spiderweb-like tattoos, and his lower body was covered in green glazed armor that was as tight as a glove and carved with gold and silver. Behind him, there were even more knights in plate armor. There were 6 of them in total, and twice the number of attendants in armor. The rear was a team of crossbowmen on horseback. They were arranged in a fan-shaped formation beside the path that led to the stream. "Which path are you on? Why are you stopping us from following the stream?" the leader of the bandits questioned. He had more than 40 warriors on his side, and there were less than 10 on the other side. The difference in numbers gave him plenty of confidence, even if the other party was a group of orc-wolf riders riding terrifying wolves. Hearing the question, Fazak grinned and joked with his kin in the orc language. "Did you see that? The sheep were like this before they were slaughtered. You actually want to ask us what we do?" The rest of the orcs laughed loudly, as if they did not care about the bandits on the other side of the stream. In their eyes, the other party was just a group of lambs waiting to be slaughtered. No, those people were the spoils of war that were going to be corralled into the sheepfold. Fazak cleared his throat. Listen to the shirtless boy on the other side. His voice was low and powerful, but his pronunciation was a little strange because he had just learned the common language of Ramsey. "You can surrender. We promise that we will not hurt you. Of course, I also hope that you can act like a man with balls. That way we can kill 1 or 2 of you to satisfy our cravings." "How dare you!" the leader of the Spider Bandits roared. He waved his hand behind him, and the crossbowmen jumped off their horses. They used the stirrups to help wind the bowstrings, took out arrows from their quivers, and aimed at the opponent. Immediately after, the bandit leader quickly pulled out his armor from behind the saddle, a set of glazed black half-body plate armor and silver chain mail, as well as a helmet inlaid with a ferocious agate spider. It was obvious that he had received special training. He put on the plate and chain mail, fastened the cowhide belt, and fastened the helmet to the bolt on the neck guard. This great bandit was done with his armor. He threw a shield from the saddle to his attendant, who immediately handed over a long-handled battle-axe. Compared to the sword and shield combination, the long-handled battle-axe was longer and more deadly. The handle was reinforced, the axe was heavy, and the tip was sharp. However, it required 2 hands to wield. The bandit leader felt that the armor on his body was enough to protect him against less than 10 orcs. "Hand over your life!" Following the leader's shout, the crossbowmen immediately pressed their fingers on the trigger. However, what caught them off guard was that the metal parts on the crossbows instantly became scorching hot. Due to the scalding of their fingers, the crossbowmen couldn't hold the weapons in their hands. The weapons of mass destruction seized from Lon Maple City's garrison fell to the ground one after another. In fact, many of those cries came from the mouths of the knights on horseback. The weapons and armors on their bodies also became scorching hot like soldering iron. Only some knight attendants who weren't qualified to wear metal armors barely escaped the fate of being scalded. As for the leader of the bandit group, because of his bad habit of not wearing a shirt under his armor, he suffered the most serious burns. He fell off his horse and fell into the stream in front of him. Catch all the sheep in the net. Throwing the already torn, scorching metal spell scroll on the ground, Fezzik took out his own net gun from the saddlebag of his mount Wolf with a whoosh. He raised his mace high in one hand and the gun in the other and took the lead in urging his dire wolf companion to charge. The other orcs from the Fezzik family followed closely behind the patriarch and pounced on the spider bandit. As brave wolf riders, they didn't care about the bandits who had lost their ability to fight because of the burns. They only shot net ropes at them when they passed by. Their target was the knight attendants who were still on horseback. Facing these terrifying orcs, the knights who had just started their night training were completely powerless. Moreover, when the war horses saw the wolves charging over, their first reaction was to tremble and tremble. With just one charge, none of the spider bandits could still stand on the ground. All the bandits, including the bandit leader who had just crawled out of the stream, were tied up like dumplings by the net rope. After doing all this, Fezzik got his blood relatives to collect the bandits' war horses and equipment. Then he adjusted the firing mode of the net gun and fired a signal flare into the sky. Finally, after checking the bandits who were tied up, Fezzik left the battlefield with his blood relatives to intercept the next batch of sheep. Not long after the wolf riders left, the bandits, who were at a loss, were about to think of a way to untie the ropes on their bodies and sneak away. Suddenly, a rustling sound came from the woods. "They come and go like the wind," Shredder Bear said as he led a group of Goliath warriors out of the woods. He was still indignantly lamenting the unfairness of fate. "It's just that Ramsay doesn't have a suitable mammoth for us to ride. Otherwise, we could have been assigned to more interesting jobs instead of collecting garbage here." As he spoke, the Goliath warrior walked up to the leader of the spider bandit. Before Fezzik left, he had used another mode of the net gun to spray the Goliath warrior with dye and carefully marked his identity. Like picking up a chick, the Goliath warrior grabbed the Goliath warrior by the neck and threw him onto a flatbed cart that drove out from the forest behind him. "Pack all these guys up and take them away," Shredder Bear ordered. The other Goliath warriors followed their captain's example and threw the bandits one by one onto the cart behind them. After cleaning up the battlefield, the Goliaths took the lead and continued to walk into the woods. As for the flatbed carts, they were guarded by some Ramsay soldiers who were in charge of logistics. They were pulled by the captured livestock and followed behind them. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.